Chapter 167. Chun Gong's face was covered with wine, and he looked confused. The shabby scholar put away his extremely shocked expression and coughed a few times before noticing Chen Gong's miserable situation. He quickly picked up a rag to wipe Chen Gong's face and advised in a low voice, "Brother, let me give you a piece of advice. This case isn't something you can handle. You should hand it over to the Supreme Court as soon as possible. Otherwise, if you get into trouble, even I won't be able to save you." Chun Gong's expression changed. He grabbed the shabby scholar's hand and said solemnly, "His Majesty has ordered me to solve the case in 8 days. There's no time to lose." The shabby scholar scratched his ear and winked. "Haven't we already caught a family of scapegoats? Brother, you are a cruel official of the Dahan country. Can't you make the Su family plead guilty?" "There is a way." Chun Gong's eyes were burning. He stared at the shabby scholar and said seriously, "But I don't want to." The shabby scholar slowly poured himself another glass of wine, and his mean voice suddenly became as gentle as a gentleman's. He chuckled and said, "You asked for the secret of the martial arts world as soon as you came. If you don't tell me, I can't help you." Chun Gong was silent. He didn't know who the shabby scholar was. He only knew that the shabby scholar's surname was Xian. He ran a pub in Yunjing for many years. A few years ago, he almost needed to drink every night to drown his sorrows. However, he didn't want to be seen by others. So, he found this winery. Day after day, he got familiar with the winery couple. Later, when the Ministry of Penalty encountered a big case and faced several difficulties, he revealed his troubles to elder brother Xian. Surprisingly, elder brother Xian told him the secrets of the martial arts world, which helped him solve the case successfully. Only then did he realize that the winery he had stumbled upon was not ordinary. 6 or 7 years passed in the blink of an eye. After Chen Gong became the minister of the Ministry of Justice, he came less often. The two were still close and called each other brothers. But even so, Chen Gong still didn't fully trust the couple. This was the natural fear and vigilance of the secular people toward the unknown martial arts world. But this time, Chen Gong knew that he had to say it. He took a deep breath. He continued, 13 years ago, because of my mistake, my wife died on the street. Until now, we have not been able to find the murderer. Later, when the autopsy was conducted, it was found that my wife was pregnant for 2 months. 1 corpse, 2 lives. The wine glass in the shabby scholar's hand stopped, and the lady boss, who had just entered the room, also slowed down her footsteps, her eyes shining brightly. Chun Gong was immersed in his memories and did not notice anything. There was also a big case that day. The Yi family in Yunjing was destroyed overnight. The shabby scholar put down the wine glass and smiled bitterly. He picked up the broom obediently and sighed. "I'm afraid I can't change it." The lady boss stared at him, but she didn't pull his ear as before. She said in a low voice, "I don't care about other things. Don't forget our purpose of coming to Yunjing." The shabby scholar nodded, but he sighed in his heart. Could the old bald ass's words be trusted? 7 years passed in a flash. He didn't even see his brother-in-law, let alone Xiaoyun's daughter. "When the tenure period is over, I will go to the Zen Mountain to ask for an explanation." In the Linli building next door, Chu Qingning and others looked at the poisonous insect in Fang Yuan's hands. They looked at each other and were speechless for a long time. Fang Yuan put away the poisonous insect. After breaking through the inborn hurdle, his natal poisonous insect also changed. It not only expanded the tracking range from 10,000 miles to 30,000 miles, but also could detect all the sounds within a radius of 300 feet. Today, he just tried it, and he even got the important information of the Zhuiyue winery. It could be regarded as an inadvertent success. Although I don't know the function of the Qin Palace, I'd better tell Su Li as soon as possible. Yin Xuedong made a decision and said, the Linli building was scheduled to open on August 15th, but Su Li couldn't come because of the case. We can only wait for Su Li to come out. That's settled. Chu Qingning laughed. Looking at Yin Xuedong, who was faintly worried, he couldn't help but pat his chest and said, "Don't worry. This kind of situation is not difficult for Su Li. Before you came, the situation in the Desu town was much more serious than this, but it was easily solved by her. This time, with the help of the Chun Palace, she will definitely be fine." Really? In Shuedong breathed a sigh of relief. Although she was still worried, Chu Qingning's words made her a little more confident. But she didn't know that Chu Qingning was also very anxious. This was Yunjing, which couldn't be compared with a small place like the Desu town. I'm going to practice. Fang Yuan heard Chu Qingning's words, and there was a helpless anger in his eyes. He turned around and left after saying that. Chu Qingning sighed and said, "Is he not satisfied after breaking through the inborn hurdle? He must be crazy and practicing recently." On the street, people were shouting incessantly. It was a noisy and prosperous scene. Chen Gong walked along the street. He used to be ruthless, but now he was at a loss. After all, he was just a cruel official who could only use torture. In the face of the powerful sects and the oppression of the two princes, he found that he might not be able to save Su Li. There were still 8 days, but he felt desperate. Bang! Turning the corner of the street, Chen Gong was careless and bumped into someone. His feet did not move, but that person fell straight down in front of Chen Gong and fell flat on his face like a dog eating shit. Damn it! Don't you have eyes when you walk? Be careful. Seeing that Chen Gong was not easy to be trifled with, the person behind him scolded him, and the voice gradually faded away. Chen Gong turned his head expressionlessly. When he was about to continue to walk, he suddenly felt that there was something in his arms. His expression changed slightly, and he took out the thing in his arms. It was a file. Chen Gong suddenly turned his head and looked at the bustling crowd. At this moment, he couldn't see the person who bumped into him. He was in a trance just now, so he didn't even have an impression of the person's face. What on earth? Chen Gong was surprised and doubtful. He quietly put away the file in his hands, but he didn't read it immediately. After returning to the Ministry of Penalty, he came to the empty underground torture room and took out the file and opened it. Wu Xiuxiu was jealous because the business of her restaurant was robbed. The first child, Wu Jin, doted on his sister, so he came up with a plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. With the help of the deadly powder of the Hahuan sect, he set up an unsolvable trap. The file was short, with no more than 1,000 words. The more Chen Gong read, the more shocked he was. The owner of the file seemed to have seen the case with his own eyes. He not only described Wu Jin's motive very clearly, but also pointed out the Hahuan sect that elder brother Xian avoided before, who was helping him in the dark. Chen Gong frowned. He had no background or special connections. Except for Zhuoyue Winery, he couldn't think of anyone. Is it because my elder brother doesn't want to say it in person, so he tells me in this way? Thinking of this, Chen Gong recovered a little spirit. Whether elder brother Xian helped him secretly or not, with this detailed file, he finally had a chance to argue for Su Li. Without informing Su Li, Chen Gong left the Ministry of Penalty excitedly and headed for the street where the Baiwei building was located. The spy in the dark saw Chen Gong leave and immediately reported to Chu Lu of the Hongyan house. Chu Lu breathed a sigh of relief and said, "It's finally done." She had been looking for an opportunity to send the file to Chen Gong. But Chen Gong was also a senior at the peak of the acquired realm. Even if she did it in person, she was not sure. Fortunately, today the spy found that Chen Gong was alone on the street as if he had lost his soul. So, she had a chance. At this time, she didn't know that she was mistaken as a person of Zhuoyue Winery. But she could complete Su Li's task, so she didn't have to be afraid. In the blink of an eye, 7 days passed. In the past 7 days, Su Li received special information about Chen Gong from Fang Yuan and asked Fang Yuan to do a few small things. For the rest of the time, Chen Gong was busy alone and didn't take her with him. She simply swaggered to practice in the room of the minister of the Ministry of Penalty. That night, she was taken back to the dungeon by Chen Gong and changed into the prison uniform. Chapter 168. On August 14th, the sky was clear. The Mid-Autumn Festival, a very important sacrificial festival of the Dahan country, would be held 1 day later. Yunjing City was full of the lively atmosphere of autumn harvest sacrifice. Only the Ministry of Penalty was cold and solemn from inside to outside. Today was the day when the Ministry of Penalty tried the case of the Baiwei building. In the early morning, many people who heard the news came to the door and stopped to watch. At 7:00 o'clock in the morning, the main gate of the Ministry of Penalty, which had not been opened for a long time, was suddenly opened by jailers from both sides. With the orderly and heavy footsteps, two teams of officers and soldiers with solemn faces came out one by one. The security extended from the trial hall to the people who stopped to watch. After the crowd was in a commotion, Chen Gong in official uniform came out from the back hall and sat behind the high table in the middle. He looked cold and solemn. He raised his eyes and glanced at the people who stopped to watch. Although there was still a yard between them, the sound of the crowd immediately disappeared. He is Chen Gong. What a terrible momentum. Not many people had seen Chen Gong. At this moment, they suddenly saw him. Although Chen Gong was not as horrible as a ghost with 3 heads and 6 arms as the rumor said, his cold, ruthless, and oppressive eyes were enough to frighten people and make them hold their breath. After Chen Gong sat down, another young man came up from the back hall. He had a gentle smile on his handsome face, as if he was a young master who came for an autumn outing. However, the black and golden official robes he wore showed that his status was not lower than Chen Gong's. Ling Qinglan glanced at the people who stopped to watch outside the Ministry of Penalty. He patted his folding fan and sat on the right side of Chen Gong. Then, 2 middle-aged men in blue official uniforms came out from the back hall. They gave a salute to Chen Gong and sat on the left side of Chen Gong. Chen Gong glanced at Ling Qinglan, who was calm and composed. His powerful voice spread through the whole hall. In the case of the Baiwei building, there are 76 injured and 5 dead. It is of great importance. According to the law of the Dahan country, this case will be jointly tried by 3 departments. It will be tried by me, Ling Qinglan, the officer of the Supreme Judiciary, Cui Ziliang and Sang He of the Censorate together to show fairness. Because the Su family and the officer of the Supreme Judiciary have an old relationship, the Supreme Judiciary only has the right to speak in this case, but not the right to vote. Do you have any objection? After that, Cui Ziliang and Sang He immediately got up and replied in unison, I have no objection. Ling Qinglan's smile remained unchanged. His official rank was the same as Chen Gong's, so he didn't need to salute. He just closed his folding fan and nodded gently. He said with a smile, Lord Chen, please. Then, bring the prisoner. Wait. Chen Gong was interrupted by a sound from the side door. He frowned and looked over coldly. An old man in his 60s with a face full of wrinkles and wearing a crane official robe walked over with a gloomy expression. There seemed to be other people behind him. Chen Gong's heart sank when he saw him. This person was the victim of this case, Ma Ling's father, Ma Weiming, the minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Chen Gong, you blocked me with the law of the Ministry of Justice for half a month, and I didn't even get to see my son. This time, I have received permission from His Majesty to listen from the side. Do you have any objections? As soon as they met, Ma Weiming shouted angrily. Even though there were commoners watching, he didn't give Chen Gong any face. The 2 imperial censors were slightly shocked, but Ling Qinglan was not surprised at all. Ma Weiming had many descendants, but he only had one son, Ma Ling. Moreover, Ma Ling was his son at the age of 40. He couldn't wait to spoil Ma Ling. Then one day, he suddenly got the news of his son's death. Chen Gong stubbornly blocked him for more than 10 days and let Ma Ling's body be buried in the Ministry of Penalty. It was not easy for him to talk to Chen Gong like this. How dare I not listen to His Majesty's oral order? Come on, bring a seat for Lord Ma. Chen Gong gave an order, and immediately a soldier brought an old-fashioned wooden armchair for Ma Weiming to sit down. He said, Lord Ma, just listen from the side. Don't intervene in the trial. Otherwise, even if it is reported to His Majesty, I will not let go of anyone who dares to despise the law of the Dahan kingdom. You. Ma Weiming widened his eyes and pointed at Chen Gong, trembling with anger. As a first-rank official, he had never been scolded like this. Even the emperor treated him kindly. This cruel official, whose mind was full of criminal laws. Well, as long as his son's death could be avenged smoothly, he would not argue with him today. Lord Chen, long time no see. Ma Jintian suddenly appeared behind Ma Weiming and said, My father ordered me to listen from the side of the case and try my best to ensure the fairness of the case. Lord Chen, please don't mind. Gong felt it was tricky when one more person came to listen from the side. But he remained calm and snorted coldly. I don't care how many people come to listen from the side. But if you interfere with the trial, don't blame me for being merciless and driving all of you out. Lord Chen, you are the judge of the case. How dare I disturb you? Ma Jintian laughed, and a ray of light flashed in his eyes. Seeing that Chen Gong had no reason to drive Ma Jintian out, Cui Ziliang, who was sitting aside, felt depressed. Why did so many people come before the court started? When he heard the first prince's order, he thought he got a good job. But after he came here, he knew it was not a good job but a deep pool of muddy water. Chen Gong was nervous. When he was about to say something, he heard something from the side door. Ma Jintian looked serious. Was there someone behind him? It shouldn't be. Everyone followed the sound and saw a young servant pushing a wheelchair into the hall of the Ministry of Penalty. The teenager in the wheelchair was disheveled and had an evil smile. It was Lingli. How could he, a playboy, come to the trial? At this moment, Chen Gong, who was always calm in front of a landslide, was shocked. Except for Ling Qinglan, the others were stunned and couldn't understand it. Ling Qinglan frowned slightly. He paid attention to Su Qingtan these days and didn't have much contact with Lingli. He didn't know why Lingli appeared here today. Lingli raised his eyebrows and said lazily, "What? Ma Jintian, can you come here? Can I come here? My father was the Lord of Jinnan before he died. I am also a little prince. Can't I even have the qualification to listen from the side of the case?" Hearing these words, everyone came to a sudden realization. So it was still a competition between the playboys. Ma Jintian's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. He said gloomily, "Lingli, if you make trouble today, even your brother can't save you." He finally offered a plan in front of the Fifth Lord. Today, he came here to implement it. But he didn't expect that Lingli would make trouble. If he was disturbed by this rascal, how could he go back and tell the Fifth Lord? Chen Gong also frowned and said in a low voice, "Lingli, the Ministry of Penalty is an important place. It's not a place for you to make trouble. Go back quickly." Lingli touched his ears and said, "Don't worry. Lord Ma's son died. How can I not know this?" Ma Weiming's mouth twitched, but Lingli didn't feel it. He continued, "I will watch the case and will never make trouble. If I really do something, I will be impotent for the rest of my life. How about that?" Everyone was shocked. Did Lingli mean it? Such a vow was definitely the most poisonous vow to a playboy, but it was quite convincing. "Fine, I'll let him stay here. Lord Chun, let's start the interrogation." Ma Weiming said helplessly. He had no mood to play tricks with the playboy. Since the victim's family had no problem, Chen Gong didn't continue to drive Lingli away. He shouted, "Bring the prisoners Su Huanli and Su Li up." Lingli sat on one side and suddenly squinted his eyes. His cold voice sounded in Ling Mo's mind. "How is the preparation?" Ling Mo, who stood behind Lingli, bowed his head slightly and said, "It has been arranged. Today, the soldiers and jailers inside and outside the court are all our people. In the end, if we want to punish Miss Su, we can save Miss Su without being noticed." Lingli nodded slightly. He inadvertently glanced at the jailer's queue that extended from the court and sighed in his heart. No matter what the result of the final interrogation was, Su Li must be safe. Otherwise, Ling Qinglan's life would be in danger. When he was thinking, a group of people in white prison uniforms were brought up. Su Li was shackled and followed Su Huanli. "Lord, I'm Su Huanli. I'm wronged." Su Huanli's face was pale. Although he was tortured a little during this time, the torture in his heart was no less than that in torture. He knelt down with a thud. His voice trembled and his body trembled. Su Li also knelt down and said in a timid voice, "Lord, I'm Su Li." Behind him, a group of waiters knelt down. Many of them had bruises and swollen faces. Some of them lost a lot of weight. It seemed that they didn't have a good time in prison. "There is a public opinion. I won't let go of any thief or kill any good man by mistake," Chen Gong said lightly. He patted the chopping board and asked in a deep voice, "Su Huanli, what were you doing on the day of the incident?" Su Huanli was shocked and said quickly, "I still run the restaurant as before." The byway building has been open for so many days, but nothing has happened. I still count on the byway building to support my family. How could I poison it? It's unreasonable. Chui Ziliang stood up and sneered. Those who want to kill don't need to be reasonable. Maybe they felt that there were too few people at the beginning of the business and poisoned it when the business was booming. Su Huanli was stunned when he heard that. He waved his hand in a panic and said, Lord, please understand. I'm just a businessman. How could I want to kill? You didn't. What about your daughter, Su Li? Chui Ziliang looked at Su Li with bad intentions and said, as an imperial censor, I have a good understanding of the case. Su Huanli, both the dishes and the stove design in the back hall of the byway building are designed by your daughter, right? Yes, yes. Su Huanli nodded blankly. Chui Ziliang immediately succeeded and said, but you embezzled all the profits of the restaurant. Your son and daughter didn't get any. You didn't even buy a piece of clothing for your daughter. You are so stingy. You did this in the Desu town, and you still did the same in Yunjing. So, your daughter wanted to destroy the byway building with hatred. Am I right? What? Chapter 169. In the hall, it was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. The atmosphere was weird. Everyone had different expressions, but they all focused on Chui Ziliang, and Su Li. Chui Ziliang's voice was very loud. His voice passed through the courtyard and fell into the ears of the people watching outside. It immediately caused a commotion. It was Su Li who did it. It's terrible. Su Huanli is her father. Even if he is a little selfish, he doesn't have to kill innocent people to revenge, right? This woman is so vicious at such a young age. She can't be kept alive. She used to be the first talented woman in Yunjing City. People said that she was not only innocent, kind, but also versatile. I almost believed it. Although Su Xiuxiu is arrogant and looks down on the commoners, she is not so vicious. After this incident, it seems that the title of First Talented Woman in Yunjing City will be returned to Miss Su. It's perfectly justified to pay with one's life. Haha, the master of the Ma family is not a good person. He deserves to die. And a vicious woman is killed. It's so cool. The officers and soldiers who stopped the people were expressionless. They were the most elite spies in the Ministry of Penalty of the Enma cult. No matter Su Li was a good person or a cruel and merciless villain, they would unconditionally execute the order of the hierarch. Your Excellency, I am wronged. Filial piety is the most important of all virtues. My parents raised me up, which is a great kindness. The byway building is also our property. How can I do such a terrible thing for the byway building? Su Li knelt on the ground. Her weak body was trembling. Her tone was a little flustered because of the influence of Chui Ziliang. But her refutation was very clear. Chun Gong was relieved. If Su Li was really scared and talked nonsense just now, he would be in trouble. Chui Ziliang, pay attention to your tone of interrogation. Are the people in the censorate so unbearable? How can you say inducing interrogation? Ling Qinglan patted his folding fan lightly. His tone was calm but a little aggressive. Chui Ziliang's expression turned ugly for a moment before returning to normal. He cupped his fists and smiled apologetically. Lord Qian, Lord Ling, I was too impatient and was rude. Please forgive me. The beginning of the temple was the time when mortals were most hesitant. He wanted to scare Su Li to succeed with one blow. Even if he didn't succeed, he wouldn't lose anything. If he succeeded, he would make a great contribution. He naturally had to give it a try. Chen Gong had seen through his tricks. He sneered inwardly and said with a solemn voice, "The trial is not a child's play. Chui Ziliang, if there's a next time, I'll kill you. This official can only ask you to leave, understand?" Chui Ziliang's face immediately turned ugly. This Chen Gong was indeed, as the rumor said, a smelly and hard stone, not pleasing at all. Saying he looked at them with a smile, and didn't mean to help Chui Ziliang at all. Although they were both imperial censors, they took different paths. Chun Gong sorted out the testimony that he had prepared for the past 7 days, looked up and asked, "Sang He, do you have the testimony for the interrogation?" Sang He immediately got up and said respectfully, "Your Excellency, please start. I will listen on the side." If I have any questions, I will ask you. All right. Feeling Sanghe's kindness, Chun Gong was a little relieved. He ignored Ling Qinglan and said loudly, Su Li, don't take Lord Chui's words seriously. Now let me ask you, where were you on the day of the crime? I was going to the affiliated school of the National Academy as usual. Unexpectedly, I was stopped by the third sister who came in from outside. The third sister said that my father asked me to go to the Byway building to help. I hurried there. When I arrived at the Byway building, my father told me that several boilers were broken. So, I went to the back to repair them. You know what happened later? Su Li said slowly. The logic of what happened was extremely clear. Chun Gong nodded frequently, and Cui Ziliang looked gloomier. Hearing this, Su Huanli suddenly looked back in amazement and blurted out, Zipei said that I asked you to go to the Byway building? Su Li was calm in her heart, but she looked confused. Yes, what happened to my father? When Su Huanli thought of what Su Zipei and her son did together with Ma'am Su Chui in the Desu town, he immediately became excited. It must be Zhu Yin who did it. Thinking of this, he kowtowed to Qin Gong and said excitedly, Lord, I didn't see the third daughter that day. Her name is Su Zipei. She is naughty and likes to make trouble for our family since she was a child. This time, she must have done something secretly. Su Huanli spared no effort to speak ill of Su Zipei. He almost vented his resentment of being locked up for so many days. Chun Gong still looked cold and solemn. He said to the officers and soldiers waiting outside, Summon Su Zipei to the hall. Chun Gong knew the ins and outs of Su Zipei. However, Su Zipei met the masked man sent by Wu Jin. Even if he summoned her, it would be useless. However, it was not easy for him to explain the origin of the clue. He had to be patient and go through the formalities. After a while, Su Zipei was brought in. Her face was very pale, but she was not flustered. It seemed that she had known that she would be summoned. I'm Su Zipei. Greetings, Lord. Bang. The chopping board suddenly made a sound. Su Zipei was so scared that her heart skipped a beat. Su Zipei, why did you lure Su Li into the Byway building under the guise of Su Huanli on the day of the incident? Chun Gong's tone was cold. His expression was completely different from when he interrogated Su Li. He said, If you dare to lie, you will be punished severely. Su Zipei gritted her teeth fiercely. Under great pressure, she said in a clear voice, I dare not lie. That morning, I didn't go out at all. I just walked around the house and then went back to talk with the second sister. In fact, the second sister told me to say those words to the eldest brother last night in order to make evidence. As soon as the words came out, everyone in the hall changed their faces. Even Su Li's heart slightly sank and her face slightly fluctuated. The more Su Zipei said, the calmer she became. Finally, she even got into the role and said sadly, she said that as long as I said so, she would help me restore the relationship between the eldest brother and me. I agreed without thinking too much. But I didn't expect that the second sister was so crazy that she did such a heartless thing. Cui Ziliang was stunned. Then he was slightly happy and almost couldn't help laughing out loud. He didn't expect that Su Zipei could come up with such a wonderful plan to slander Su Li. Even if Su Li had thousands of mouths, she couldn't explain it clearly. A bunch of nonsense. Qin Gong was shocked and angry. He pounded the table and stood up. He stared at Su Zipei without blinking and said, Su Zipei, do you know the cost of making false evidence according to the law of the Dahan dynasty? Su Zipei's eyes flashed with panic. But when she thought of what the woman said, she made up her mind. She straightened up her kneeling body and said loudly, Lord, what I said is true. If there is any lie, I'm willing to be struck by lightning. Chun Gong's face was completely gloomy. Cui Ziliang immediately laughed and said, Lord Qin, why are you so angry? Since Su Zipei made such a vicious oath and there is no conflict of interest with the case, her words are 90% credible. In this case, Su Li is lying. The situation is so clear and the evidence is irrefutable. Lord Qin, why don't you convict and close the case? Half a day has passed. We can go back and report. For a moment, the hall was silent. The voices outside the Ministry of Penalty became more and more noisy. What? The case is closed? Have you convicted Suli? Such a sin should be beheaded in public at 3:00 at noon in order to appease the anger of the people. What's the matter? Should we convict her or not? Isn't Chen Gong an honest and ruthless official? Why is she so indecisive? Chen Gong's back was sweating and his heart could not stop sinking. He was careless. Su Zipei made false evidence and forced Suli into a dead end. He could not find any reason to continue the interrogation. He clenched a corner of the paper and lamented in his heart. He prepared a stack of paper, but didn't use any of them. Seeing Chen Gong's cold face and silent, Cui Ziliang suddenly smiled and said, "It seems that Lord Chun has no objection. In this case, I judge." Su Zipei couldn't help but raise her head and stared at Cui Ziliang with a trace of excitement and expectation in her eyes. "Wait." Cui Ziliang was stunned and looked to his side. The one who interrupted him was Sang He, who had never spoken. "Lord Cui, why are you so anxious? I think it is rare for the 3 departments to jointly try this case. We should pay more attention to the details. It is unreasonable to close the case so hastily." Cui Ziliang's face immediately turned green. He pointed to Sang He and said angrily, "Sang He, what do you mean?" Sang He still had a smile on his thin and weathered face. He spread out his hands and said, "Lord Cui, why are you angry? I am just judging the matter as it stands. How can we convict her and close the case hastily based on a testimony whose authenticity is uncertain?" "You." Cui Ziliang stared at him. Before he finished his words, he was interrupted by another person. It turned out to be Ma Weiming, the victim. Su Li and Su Huanli were in front of him. Ma Weiming glanced at them. There was no hatred in his eyes. Instead, he was angry. "Lord Cui, I also think there are many strange things in this case. My son's death can't be in vain. We can't let the real murderer get away with it. This case needs to be retried. We can't do it casually." Ma Jintian looked at Ma Weiming in surprise. Where did this old thing get the news? Fortunately, the 7th Lord was wise and his words didn't conflict with Ma Weiming's. Ma Jintian immediately said with a smile, "Lord Ma's idea is my idea. Lord Cui, the censurate's investigation is so rough. I am afraid that there are many unjust and wrong cases in these years. Lord Cui, why don't you hand over the cases of these years to the Ministry of Penalty for retrial? Maybe you can get a lot of results." "Haha, interesting. Little Pockmark is so eloquent. You really got some of my teachings," Ling Li said lazily. Hearing Ling Li's lazy words, Ma Jintian, who thought he was high-spirited, became angry and said angrily, "Who are you calling little Ma Zi?" Cui Ziliang stared blankly at the sudden change of the situation. He suddenly felt cold. Sang He suddenly changed sides. Why didn't Ma Weiming support him? Instead, he asked Chen Gong to continue the trial? It was completely different from what he expected. The 2 young masters of the Ma family and the Ling family, who should never be provoked, also spoke for Su Li. Seeing a strange smile on Chen Gong's face, Cui Ziliang suddenly came to his sense. Then he realized that in the entire hall, except for him who wanted to punish the Su family, all the others were against him. Chapter 170. The situation changed so fast that Chen Gong had no time to think. He immediately seized the opportunity and said, "I also don't think it is appropriate. Since both Lord Sang and Lord Wei agree, we will continue to interrogate this case." Su Zipei was in a daze. She was kneeling beside Su Li, but she was like a forgotten rag in the corner. No one looked at her at all. It seemed that what she just said turned a deaf ear to everyone except Cui Ziliang. "Why?" Su Zipei's eyes were filled with unwillingness. Her fingertips, which were hidden in her sleeves, were clenched so tightly that they turned white. Her body was tense and slightly trembling. The bitterness in her heart seemed to be mixed with more fear. Why? She had done so much, but she still couldn't bring down Su Li? Could it be that the dead which was right about one thing, that Su Li was born to live? At this time, Chen Gong picked up an old piece of wood on the table and handed it to Sang He for everyone to see. His eyes were clear and his tone was extremely calm. "In fact, I'm 70% sure about the ins and outs of this case. The Su family is not the murderer, but the victim." Hearing this, The people were all in an uproar. Chui Ziliang's heart skipped a beat. Other people's faces also changed slightly. Even Ling Qinglan's expression changed a lot. He glanced at Ling Li secretly, but Ling Li frowned slightly. It seemed that he didn't know it. Didn't Ling Li help? Chun Gong was alone. What could he find? Ling Qinglan's eyes flashed, but he didn't say anything. He took the piece of wood and looked at it carefully. Soon he found that there was a slight burn mark in the middle of the wood. The mark was very fresh. Lord Chen, can you let me have a look? Ma Weiming also breathed heavily. He didn't have much hope, but Chun Gong's performance made him have a little confidence in him. Lord Ma, please. Chun Gong stood up and handed the wood to Ma Weiming. Then he said loudly, after the autopsy of Ma Ling's body, we got a lot. The poison of Ma Ling and his 4 companions is the same as that of other guests of the Baiwei building, but it is not the same. While Chen Gong was talking, the autopsy standing aside immediately presented a paper for Sang He and Ling Qinglan to see. The autopsy of the Ministry of Penalty was just an ordinary person. Ling Qinglan took the paper casually, but when he saw the words on it, his face immediately changed. 3 poisons mixed, and he died immediately. How could it be detected by an ordinary autopsy? Ling Qinglan raised his head and looked at Chun Gong meaningfully. It seemed that there were people around Chen Gong. Ling Li picked his ears lazily. He didn't need to think to know that it was the poison detected by Su Li. It would be strange if the coroner, who had no kung fu, could find out the deadly powder. Ma Weiming's hands trembled as he read the autopsy report. It was very clear that the other guests of the Baiwei building were poisoned by the mixture of 2 poisons, but his son was poisoned by the mixture of 3 poisons and died immediately. Although he was not a person in the martial arts circle, he also knew that such unpredictable means could not be done by an ordinary restaurant. There must be someone with extraordinary abilities in Jianghu who deliberately participated in it. Chun Gong sat in his original position and said with fervor and assurance, I personally cut this wood from a square table in the Baiwei building. The burning trace is linear, which is the trace left by the burning of sandalwood. Judging from the burning trace, it was burned on the day of the crime. According to the confession of the waiters, it was the place where Ma Ling sat before he died. So, I speculate that it was Ma Ling who burned the incense and released the poison. What? Ma Weiming stood up and shouted angrily, It's impossible. How could my son be the murderer? I spoiled him a little, but he didn't have the courage to kill people. I also think it's impossible. Chui Ziliang finally found a chance to interrupt. Lord Chen, you said that Ma Ling was poisoned with a mixture of strange poisons. It's impossible for ordinary people to master such a strange poison. But don't forget that Su Li is the apprentice of Qi Xianqing, the miracle-working doctor. A doctor is very good at controlling the property of medicine. It's easy for her to poison him. After talking for a long time, it's more and more likely that Su Li committed a crime. Why do you quibble for her? Chen Gong sneered. Lord Shui, you repeatedly want an innocent person to confess his crime. What's your intention? Is it because I have touched your sore spot that your dog can't bear it? Chui Ziliang's expression changed greatly. He was shocked and angry. Chen Gong, what do you mean? Don't slander me. Seeing that the tension was getting stronger, Sang He immediately stood up to be the peacemaker. Lord Chen, calm down. Lord Shui, you should also calm down. This trial is conducted by 3 departments, and ordinary people are watching. If it's seen by someone with ulterior motives and made into a rumor, I'm afraid that His Majesty will be furious. Chui Ziliang held his breath slightly. He turned his head and saw a large number of people in Yunjing City pointing at the door. He could only temporarily suppress his anger and sit back. Seeing that, Chun Gong didn't insist and continued to say, Lord Wei, don't be impatient. Although Ma Ling poisoned Su Li, he is not the murderer. Ma Weiming was stunned when he heard that. Chun Gong shouted at this time, Call Tang Lei into the court. Tang Lei? Which Tang Lei? Ma Jintian looked out in surprise and immediately saw a round fat man walking inside. He looked back at Ling Li, who seemed to be in a trance and couldn't help but pout. He didn't expect that the 3 wastes of Yunjing should get together on this occasion. Ma Weiming was also surprised and thought, Isn't he the eldest son of Lord Tang? What does he come for? It was the first time for Tang Lei to come to this kind of occasion. He looked a little nervous, but he was born in an extraordinary family, so his etiquette was considerate. He said, "I'm Tang Lei, Lord Chun." Chun Gong nodded slightly and said, "Tang Lei, tell me in detail what happened between you and Ma Ling." Tang Lei immediately made his conversation with Ma Ling public. He was simple-minded. When he said that, he didn't think that what he said would have a great impact on the situation. He didn't think that he not only represented himself, but also the whole Prime Minister Tang's mansion in the eyes of some people. Chui Ziliang's expression finally became extremely gloomy. He even had a trace of resentment against Wu Jin and the First Prince. Was this the crime without any loopholes that they said? It was obviously full of loopholes. Ma Weiming's face was gloomy and terrible. He said, "So, my son was instigated by someone to poison Ma Ling, and then he was killed?" "Exactly." Chun Gong's tone became more and more dignified. He said, "The source of the third kind of poison is unknown. I guess that when Ma Ling contacted the real murderer, he was secretly poisoned by the real murderer. So, he committed such a tragedy. How dare you? Who is so arrogant?" Ma Weiming was so angry that he pounded the table and stood up. He stayed at home last night. Suddenly, a cold arrow was shot at his bedside, which scared him half to death. There was a note tied to the cold arrow. After he opened it, there was only one line of words on it. It said that the First Prince was behind the case of the Byway building. He thought hard for a night and was dubious, but he didn't want his son to die in vain. Today, he came to listen to the case to confirm it. If even Qin Gong said that the Su family was the real murderer, he would pretend that the note had never appeared. However, what he had heard today had caused his thoughts to lean towards that piece of paper. So much evidence is enough to prove that the Su family is innocent and the victim. Lord Qin, in your opinion, who is the real murderer of this case? Sang He asked with a smile. It seemed that he was not surprised by Qin Gong's words at all. The general situation was settled. Qin Gong showed a faint smile on his face and said in a low voice, "It is extremely difficult to mix the three poisons. It can't be controlled by ordinary people. For this reason, I didn't hesitate to contact people in the martial arts circle these days. Finally, I found that the poison in Ma Ling's body was the deadly powder of the Hahuan sect." The Hahuan sect? The deadly powder? Qin Gong's words were full of vigor. Not only did all the people in the hall hear it clearly, but even the common people who were watching outside heard it clearly. Chui Ziliang's expression changed greatly, and he immediately sneered. Ling Li and Ling Qinglan were shocked at the same time. Qin Gong really dared to say it? Su Li lowered her head and frowned slightly. It was not a joke to annoy a ninth-grade sect. It could be imagined that after this public trial, the Su family would no longer be noticed and Qin Gong would replace it. At this moment, he was like a fire in the dark. He could only wait for the devil's claw in the dark to catch him. Was Qin Gong courting death? She thought of the empty walls in Qin Gong's home and the room full of lanterns. She felt more complicated. Suzy Pei. It seemed that Qin Gong didn't know that he was in danger. His cold eyes suddenly looked at Suzy Pei, who was kneeling beside him, and his voice became colder. "Now, do you still insist on making false testimony and killing your sister? If you don't tell the truth, I can only take you as an accomplice of this case and put you in prison." Suzy Pei was under pressure like a devil. Suzy Pei was so scared that she almost peed. She got up and kowtowed hard. "Lord, please forgive me. I was possessed for a moment. In fact, someone asked me to go out that day. It was a masked man. He asked me to say so and gave me 10,000 taels of silver. I thought it was only a matter of one sentence, so I couldn't help it. Later, he found me again and said that if I didn't do as he said, he would put me in prison. I was afraid. You sold your father and sister for 10,000 taels of silver? You are greedy for life and afraid of death. How can Su Li have such a vicious and money-minded sister like you?" Qin Gong was angry and couldn't help but ridicule. Except for Su Qingtan, there was no good person in the Su family where Su Li stayed. "I won't do it again." Su Zipei burst into tears. Her tears and mucus were overflowing, which was extremely disgusting. A group of waiters who knew that they had been exonerated felt relaxed. They couldn't help but move their bodies with disgust in their eyes. He thought to himself that even if they were to bring an ugly girl home, they would never marry such a vicious girl like Susie Pei. Clap. The gavel rang. Chun Gong stood in front of the desk with a dignified look and said in a loud voice, "After 8 days of hard investigation, the real murderer of the Baiwei building case has been found out. It is the Hahuan sect, a force in Jianghu. I will report it to the imperial court and ask for an explanation from the Hahuan sect." Speaking of this, Chun Gong looked at Su Li with gentleness in his eyes. Su Huanli and his family are acquitted. Wow. Chapter 171. At night, in the first prince's mansion. Crack. Dongfang Sheng was so angry that he smashed the file on Wu Jin's face. Then it fell to the ground. "Is this the good plan that you said?" "Huh." Dongfang Sheng was so angry that he almost went crazy. He pointed at Wu Jin and said, "At the beginning, you said that this plan was flawless. Now all the people in Yunjing City know that the case was committed by the Hahuan sect. How can I explain it to the people of the Hahuan sect?" Wu Jin's respectful expression gradually stiffened. He slowly bent down to pick up the file. His face suddenly became ferocious for a moment. Then he straightened up and recovered his usual calmness. He said in a low voice, "Your Highness, there is no need to panic. I have a remedy." "What remedy?" "Child Wu, can you tell me about it?" Before Wu Jin finished his words, a sweet female voice came from outside the door. But the emotion in the voice was different from the tenderness in the past. It was full of anger. Dongfang Sheng's heart skipped a beat. He looked up and saw Chu Lu coming with the people of the Hahuan sect. Wu Jin was a little angry. Why did the people of the Hahuan sect come as soon as he mentioned the Hahuan sect? Chu Lu walked to the first prince with a smile on her face, but her eyes were cold and unapproachable. She curtsied and said, "Your Highness, I pay my respects to the first prince." Dongfang Sheng forced a smile and hurriedly came over to help Chu Lu up. He said, "What brings you here today? I'm really surprised and surprised." Chu Lu took a step back without a trace and said with a slight smile, "In my opinion, the first prince must be frightened a lot, right?" Dongfang Sheng's expression changed slightly. He didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't expect that Chu Lu was so disrespectful. She even didn't pretend to be harmonious. "Lady Chu, please pay attention to your words and deeds. This is the first prince of the Dahan country and the future crown prince of the Dahan country, even the emperor." Wu Jin stood up to speak for Dongfang Sheng. The seniors of the Hahuan sect behind Chu Lu immediately sneered. Chu Lu walked over to Dongfang Sheng with light steps and giggled. "I didn't want to blame you, but from your attitude, it seems that I have done something wrong. What's the reason?" Hearing this, Dongfang Sheng's face suddenly changed. He turned around and said angrily, "Wu Jin, shut up." Wu Jin held his breath and clenched his fists that were hidden in his sleeves. He could barely suppress his anger. His face turned green and red, which was wonderful. Seeing that Wu Jin held back, Dongfang Sheng breathed a sigh of relief. As far as he knew, the third prince had already cooperated with the Lianshi cult. If he lost the help of the all-pleasure sect now, his chances of winning the title of crown prince would be even slimmer. "Your First Highness, before you used the life-extinguishing powder, you promised me that you would never reveal the existence of the all-pleasure sect. But now, how do you explain it?" Chu Lu's eyes were burning, and her tone was full of oppression. No one could imagine that she was the thief who cried, "Stop thief." "I have indeed failed to consider this matter thoroughly." Dongfang Sheng suppressed his irritation and said sincerely, "I didn't expect that Chun Gong had the means to find out the life-extinguishing powder, and it was related to the martial arts circle." "Your First Highness, do you mean that the life-extinguishing powder of the all-pleasure sect is wrong?" Chu Lu's eyes were cold. Dongfang Sheng was flustered and quickly waved his hand. "No, no, no, I don't mean that." Wu Jin stood aside with no expression. He knew very well what the all-pleasure sect was planning, but at this moment, he had no idea to remind Dongfang Sheng. Seeing that the first prince was so humble, all the people of the all-pleasure sect couldn't help but feel complacent. Of course, they didn't come here to cut off contact with the first prince. Now their purpose had been achieved. Chu-Lu covered her mouth and chuckled. She became charming again and said, "Since the first prince is still sincere, I will give you another chance. However, I am afraid that the agreement made by the first prince and the all-pleasure sect needs to be changed." The first prince was shocked and finally realized that the purpose of the all-pleasure sect was different from what he thought. But now he was in a weak position and there was no room for regret. "Lady Chu, how do you want to change it?" The first prince took a deep breath and asked aloud. He was ready to be slaughtered. An hour later, Chu-Lu arrogantly left with all the people of the all-pleasure sect, leaving the first prince with a livid face. Soon after, there was a sound of things being smashed in the room. It was late at night. Wu Jin left with uncertainty in his eyes. There were many forces who wanted to fight for the throne. He wouldn't put all his efforts on one person. Su Li and Su Huanli returned home. Except for Mammy Li, who came out to greet them happily, they didn't see Su Qingtan. When they got off the carriage, Su Huanli didn't look at Su Li and left in a hurry. He was extremely tired. Now he just wanted to have a good sleep and couldn't care about anything else. After Mammy Li got the news, she had prepared a large table of sumptuous meals for Su Li. "Miss, it's not good in prison, right? Look, you have lost weight." Su Li smiled slightly and didn't answer. Except for the first day and last night, she lived in the Qin Palace. How could she suffer? "Mammy, where is eldest brother?" After eating a mouthful of food, Su Li put down the chopsticks and asked, "Oh, I just waited for Miss and didn't pay attention to him." Mammy Li patted her thigh and said strangely, however, "First Master didn't come back from the Supreme Judiciary these days. It seems that he has been very busy." "Really?" Ling Qinglan's face appeared in Su Li's mind. She nodded slightly and said, "In this case, I will ask him tomorrow. It's worrying that he doesn't go home without saying a word." "Hey, Miss, you have to take care of yourself first. First Master must be delayed by something." Mammy Li couldn't help but exhort. Although she knew some secrets of Su Li, she subconsciously regarded Su Li as a kind girl who only thought about others. This was the inherent mode of getting along with Su Li. It couldn't be changed easily. Su Li responded and said with a smile, "Mammy, you should have an early rest." Hey, it was a quiet night. Early the next morning, Su Li took a car to the Supreme Judiciary. At this moment, she had restored her identity as a lecturer of the affiliated school. After explaining her purpose, the guard at the door didn't dare to stop her and quickly let Su Li in. As soon as she approached Ling Qinglan's office, Su Li sniffed gently and frowned unconsciously. She sensed a faint chill floating in the air. According to Ling Qinglan's injury, he shouldn't be so serious. "Miss Su Li's sudden visit really flatters me." When Su Li was thinking, Ling Qinglan came out of the study with a folding fan. His face was ruddy, and he smiled faintly. He didn't look like a person who was terminally ill at all. Su Li stopped thinking and opened her red lips slightly. Her soft voice came into Ling Qinglan's ears. "Lord Ling, I am Su Li. I want to ask why my brother didn't go home for many days." He didn't reply. "I am really worried." Ling Qinglan smiled warmly and said, "I see. Miss Su Li, don't worry. There is indeed an urgent case in the Supreme Judiciary, and we need someone to collect evidence. I think Su Qingtan is restless because of your case. I am afraid that he will do something impulsive, so I sent him to a distant place. I forgot to send a message to your family." "I see. Thank you, Lord Ling." Su Li was enlightened and said gratefully, but she was a little vigilant in her heart. Ling Qinglan was lying. Since she let Feng Yuan contact Chu Lu, the shortcoming of intelligence had disappeared. The Supreme Judiciary was also a force that Chu Lu observed. Recently, there was no urgent case in the Supreme Judiciary at all. There was no case that needed to send someone to collect evidence. She quietly looked over Ling Qinglan and fell on the study behind him. She always cared about the chill. Thinking of this, Su Li smiled and said, "I have never been to the Supreme Judiciary. Lord Ling, can you take me to the study to have a seat?" Ling Qinglan slightly stopped smiling and said, "Miss Su Li is a natural beauty. It is difficult for me to refuse your request, but the Supreme Judiciary is the place to handle cases. There are many files in the study, which are all confidential. I am willing but unable to do so. I can only let Miss Suli down. Ah, I just asked casually. Lord Ling, don't worry about it. Suli repeatedly waved her hands and said apologetically, since I got the news from the eldest brother, I will go back first. Lord Ling, goodbye. Ling Qinglan replied with a him and didn't forget to remind her with a smile. Be careful on the way. Suli turned her back and her face instantly became calm. There must be something strange in Ling Qinglan's study. But it was daytime now. Ling Qinglan was a senior of the inborn realm and lived in the Supreme Judiciary. If he wanted to explore the study, he needed to make a long-term plan. Seeing Suli's back, Ling Qinglan's smile almost disappeared at the same time. His intuition told him that Suli seemed not necessarily as easy to fool as she looked. He didn't care about it in the Qinghe province. But this time, in the case of the Baiwei building, she also inexplicably avoided danger. He couldn't help feeling strange. Ling Li suddenly went to audit the case. I don't know if it has anything to do with her. Ling Qinglan muttered to himself in a low voice. He was very clear about Ling Li's temperament. Ling Li was a person with a strong purpose. If Ling Li didn't show enough wisdom and intelligence at that time, Ling Li might not save him at all. When he didn't know Ling Li, he was full of contempt and disdain when he looked at Ling Li. But later he thought that Ling Li also looked at him as if he was looking at garbage at that time. It's a pity that I have to keep an eye on Su Qingtan. Otherwise, I must ask him what benefits Suli has. With a sigh, Ling Qinglan walked back to the study. Su Qingtan was at a critical moment, so he couldn't leave. Achoo. In the Ling mansion, Ling Li sniffed and felt strange. Who on earth was talking about him? Ling Xian. What the hell is Ling Qinglan doing recently? I haven't seen him for many days. Ling Xian chuckled and said, Master Qinglan has always been like this. Tomorrow is the Mid-Autumn Festival. He will definitely come to spend the festival with Madame Dowager and Madame Dowager. After the Mid-Autumn Festival, it will be the annual autumn hunting. Ling Li's eyes flickered and he said, Last year, I was at a critical moment of practice, so I didn't join in the fun. This year, I have to see who is the unlucky guy. Ling Xian's beautiful eyes flashed with light. Chapter 172. After leaving the Supreme Judiciary, Suli changed her appearance to that of a young man who met Chu Lu in the Hongyan house that day. Then she came to the street where the Linli building was located. It was the 15th day of the 8th lunar month again. Lanterns were hung in front of every household. Although the alley was secluded, children could be seen playing on the street. Poor people squatted by the door and picked vegetables while watching their children. The scene reflected in Suli's eyes made her feel a little warm. After watching for a moment, Suli glanced at the proprietress of the Zhuiyue winery who came out with a bucket of swill. She immediately calmed down and stepped into the Linli building which had been opened. When Suli saw the proprietress also noticed Suli. The proprietress poured out the swill and looked back to see the high-rise building whose door was wide open. An obscure light flashed in her eyes. She scolded, What a spendthrift. It's okay that the winery is remote. It's better to use the money to buy a good land than to build a high-rise building. The shabby scholar staggered to the door with a flagon. He was half drunk and half awake. He rolled his eyes and said, As long as it doesn't affect our business, why do you care so much about others? The lady boss shook her sturdy shoulders and slammed the bucket of swill onto the ground. She turned around and scolded, I'm just nagging you, and you're getting all worked up. You bastard. Are you itching for a beating again? It seemed that the shabby scholar didn't hear the proprietress's words at all. He closed his eyes and sniffed with an intoxicated look. He said, The wine is so fragrant. When did our wine become so fragrant? Damn drunkard. Where does the fragrance come from? The proprietress's big round face showed a strange expression. She said, The fragrance of osmanthus can be smelled in the morning. Which family's osmanthus blooms? Huh. No. The smell? The shabby scholar suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were bright. He sniffed like a dog smelling the smell. He went out of the winery and arrived at the door of the Linli building in a blink of an eye. Hey, you damn scholar. You don't drink your own wine but take care of the business of the neighbor. Come back. The shabby scholar was drunk at the moment, but he didn't care about the shouts of his wife behind him. He rushed into the Leanly building regardless of the consequences. The Leanly building had just opened, and it was very quiet at the moment. The shabby scholar stood at the door and looked at the exquisite and unostentatious decoration. He sighed. What a rich family. It's all made of money. Sir, what would you like to order? The wine of the Leanly building is unique in the world. There is no other branch. Inshuedong came forward with a smile and asked, but she was not calm inside. In front of her was a senior in the inborn realm. She didn't know whether the elixir given by Suli was effective or not. She just took it for less than a quarter of an hour. Leanly building? Good name. The shabby scholar praised loudly and said in a carefree manner, drinking wine is for one to be happy and to one's heart's content. It seems that this girl is the boss of the Leanly building. I didn't expect that she also has the same interests. The shabby scholar didn't see anything. Inshuedong secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Su Li's attainments in the elixir circle had reached the acme of perfection. Since the scholar in front of her couldn't see anything, she didn't need to worry about exposing her cultivation and identity as long as she didn't meet a senior in the longevity realm above the inborn realm. Thinking of this, Inshuedong made a salute and said modestly, Sir, you misunderstood me. I'm just the shopkeeper of the inn. My master is the owner of the winery. It turned out to be so. The shabby scholar was suddenly enlightened. He found a table and sat down. His hands touched the smooth mirror-like table, and his face was full of enjoyment. This was a good rosewood. Sir, what kind of wine do you want? Inshuedong's smile remained unchanged, but she secretly muttered in her heart. Was this person really the senior in the inborn realm that Suli mentioned? How could he have such a poor and pedantic look that he had never seen the world? Speaking of wine, the shabby scholar suddenly remembered the business. He subconsciously looked at the wooden sign hanging behind the cabinet. Then his face suddenly turned green. Osmanthus wine. The wine is mellow, sweet, and not greasy. First-class Osmanthus wine, 100,000 taels per jar. Second-class Osmanthus wine, 1,000 taels per jar. Third-class Osmanthus wine, 100 taels per jar. Liehua wine. The heart and lungs are as fierce as fire. The wine is so mellow that one drop of it is intoxicated. First-class Liehua wine, 50,000 taels per jar. Second-class Liehua wine, 500 taels per jar. Third-class Liehua wine, 50 taels per jar. Osmanthus cake, fried peanuts, beef. The shabby scholar's eyes widened. Ordinary dishes with wine were not much different from the price of other restaurants. But what was the matter with those two kinds of wine? Even the lowest third-grade wine was several times more expensive than the best wine in a normal restaurant. It was a scam. It was a blatant scam. The shabby scholar looked nervous and couldn't wait to rush out of the door. But his house was next door, and they would meet each other frequently in the future. He couldn't do that. He hid a little money, but it was only 5 taels. He couldn't even afford a pot of wine. Smelling the increasingly strong fragrance of the wine, the shabby scholar swallowed and rubbed his hands. He asked wretchedly, Well, shopkeeper, on the first day of your winery's opening, don't you even have a discount? Look, your wine is so expensive. No one dares to buy it. Inshuedong's smile froze on his face. He couldn't believe it. Would a senior above the inborn realm be short of wine money? Treat him as an ordinary drinker and explain the purpose. Suddenly, Inshuedong transmitted the sound in silence. He immediately came to his sense and pointed to the wine jar which had been unsealed at the door. He smiled solemnly and said, My master said that good wine fears no dark alley. If someone is proficient in wine, he can know that the wine sold by the Leanly building is absolutely good just by smelling the fragrance of the wine. Only then did the shabby scholar see a row of wine jars at the door. His eyes suddenly turned green. He couldn't wait to take a jar and leave. But the reason in his mind still stopped him. He sighed and said, The fragrance of the wine is strong, and it is fragrant for 10 miles. How can a drinker not know good wine? He also knew that it was good wine, but he couldn't afford it. Inshuedong saw that the time was right. She immediately smiled and said, You don't need to feel pity. Today, you are the first guest to come to the Leanly building. My master said that if a neighbor comes to ask for wine, He should give a pot of wine. Please wait for a moment. I will go down to prepare dishes for you. The shabby scholar was shocked and then overjoyed. He quickly got up and walked to the door. Inshuadong was so scared that she stepped back a few steps. She was surprised. Was the senior so noble that she didn't even take advantage of a pot of wine? Shopkeeper, wait a moment. My wife is also a wine lover. Wait for me to call her over. The wine must be counted according to the number of people, right? It would be impolite to refuse. Ha 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 ha. Inshuadong stared blankly at the shabby scholar who left hurriedly. She had never seen such a shameless person. He even took advantage of others with him. Suli hid upstairs. When she saw this scene, she couldn't help but smile. She said to Chu Qingning, who was dressed as a waiter beside her, prepare a pot of Liehua spirits and a pot of osmanthus wine. Serve the osmanthus cake. Chu Qingning had a strange look on his face and muttered, a poor scholar who likes to take advantage of others and a middle-aged woman. Suli, do you recognize the wrong person? Fang Yuan nodded in agreement. Except for the underground addendum, they had lived here for several months. They had never noticed any abnormality of the couple next door. Every day, they worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. It was extremely ordinary. Suli glanced at Fang Yuan and asked, in the inborn realm, there is a way in the heart. It is also an obsession. Fang Yuan, what is your way? What is the obsession in your heart? Suddenly being asked, Fang Yuan was stunned. He raised his head and looked at Suli's clear eyes. His face tightened, and he immediately looked away. How could he say that kind of obsession out? Seeing Fang Yuan's reaction, Suli felt quite strange, but she didn't ask again. Hate and love are both obsessions. After the inborn realm, it becomes the way of refining the mind. Although Qi Xianqing, the miracle-working doctor, practiced medicine to save the world, his obsession was only his sect, so he had countless disciples. The inborn seniors of the Lianshi cult are all desires in their hearts. So, they still have a clear mind despite the blood in their hands. Fang Yuan became more and more silent when he heard the words. Chu Qingning didn't understand, but he finally figured out what Suli wanted to say. You mean, the way that the couple took? Suli narrowed her eyes slightly and said, the way of the mortal world is not for everyone. If the warrior was powerful, the desire in his heart would expand. He longed for wealth, power, and more powerful strength. All these would lead to the warrior losing his original heart. This was why so many sects looked at the secular world with contempt and disdain. They thought that they were superior and could control life and death. Ordinary people were non-entities. After becoming a superior person, who would want to return to the previous life of non-entities? Chu Qingning looked down at the couple, one thin and one fat, who came in at the door. They were really like ordinary people. He couldn't help but sigh that they were really not easy to deal with. Thinking of this, he immediately went downstairs to prepare the dishes. Downstairs, the fat proprietress sat at the table and touched the smooth tables and chairs lovingly. Her eyes were shining. She really wanted to move a set back to sit. Seeing that the lobby was empty and the waiter didn't serve the dishes for a long time, the proprietress couldn't help but lower her voice and ask, "Husband, did you deliberately deceive me just now? Such an expensive restaurant, we can't afford to lose our own winery." Hey, the shabby scholar interrupted. The shopkeeper just told me personally. How can it be false? Hey, look, it's here now. Then he saw Chu Qingning, who came out of the back hall with a plate. His eyes suddenly brightened. Dishes are served. These are the Liehua spirits and osmanthus wine given by our master to you. Please enjoy. Chu Qingning quickly set up the dishes and wine pot, and was about to go down after shouting. The shabby scholar couldn't wait to pour a glass of wine and pour it into his mouth. But the proprietress grabbed the wine glass in his hand and shouted, "Take care, young man." Chu Qingning looked back doubtfully. What else do you need? He despised them in his heart. Did they want to take some back to drink? Even if they followed the mortal world, they couldn't be so shameless. The proprietress squeezed a smile on her face and asked in a gentle voice, "I want to ask why there are no other waiters in such a big winery. It's so lonely." Chapter 173. Sir, I don't know what you asked. Why don't you ask the shopkeeper when she comes over later? Chu Qingning scratched his head and smiled embarrassedly, but there was a layer of cold sweat on his back. If Suli didn't remind him, he almost found other excuses to dodge the question. But if he did that, it didn't conform to his identity as a waiter. The old woman's question seemed to be simple, but it was actually full of traps, which were impossible to guard against. Oh, I'm so stupid. Little brother, you can go to work. The fat proprietress said politely. She relaxed her vigilance slightly and let go of the shabby scholar's hand without a trace. Honey, be careful. The wine was almost spilled out. The shabby scholar complained pitifully and finally drank the first mouthful of wine as he wished. As soon as the spicy wine entered his throat and flowed through his stomach, a strong warmth rose. The shabby scholar sighed refreshingly. His eyes were hazy with drunkenness. It seemed that the wine didn't intoxicate him, but he was intoxicated. How many years had passed? Since he stepped into the inborn realm, it was difficult to drink the wine of the secular world. It was tasteless and unbearable. It was said that there was spiritual wine in the spiritual circle. Ordinary people in the secular world could prolong their life after drinking it. Warriors could not only enjoy it, but also improve their cultivation. But that kind of spiritual wine was rare even in the spiritual circle. Even if he and his wife didn't follow the path of the secular world, they might not have the financial resources to buy it. Unexpectedly, in the 7th year of seclusion in Yunjing, he met a good wine that he could drink. He was a person who liked wine. Such a surprise was no less than finding a rare treasure. The proprietress sipped the osmanthus wine and ate dishes at the same time. She was elegant and cheerful, which was completely opposite to her rough appearance. It could be seen that she liked the wine and dishes of the Linley building very much. They ate separately. They didn't communicate on the surface, but secretly transmitted the sound. Honey, do you see anything unusual? Honey, you can't see it. How can I see it? The shopkeeper is a young girl. She looks no more than 20 years old and has no cultivation. The waiter's expression is also very natural. It seems that there is nothing strange. You were worried in vain a few days ago. That's hard to say. If he really wanted to hide, he must have made thorough preparations. It's too early to make a conclusion. It was very strange for a luxurious winery to suddenly appear in a remote alley. The couple had been on guard for a long time. The scene this morning was just a show for them to investigate. However, when they came in and served the dishes, they didn't expect that they would be attracted by the dishes of the Linley building. Halfway through the meal, the shabby scholar puffed his cheeks and suddenly let out a sigh. He continued to transmit his voice. Speaking of which, the wine in this shop is really delicious. The ones I brew can't even compare to the raging fire. If I can't drink the blazer wine in the future, I won't be able to live these days. The fat lady boss glared at the scholar and said, We really can't live like this. The wine you brew and the dishes I cook can't compare with the Linley building. If the winery's business fails, we'll all have to starve. You're still thinking about drinking? The shabby scholar was dumbfounded when he heard the words. His wife was right. Their winery and the Linley building were rivals in the same trade. The Joyue winery had been open for 7 years and had accumulated a lot of old customers. Once the Linley building opened, a group of old customers from rich families would definitely be attracted away. It was a big problem whether the Joyue winery could maintain its livelihood. The shabby scholar drank the wine one by one. The more he drank, the more worried he was. When he drank the last drop of wine in the cup, his face was full of sorrow. It was not easy for him to live incognito in Yunjing. He didn't want to fail in the last 3 years. In the next 3 years, he had to tighten his belt. Drinking? Don't even think about it. The fat lady boss was used to saving. After she cleaned up the dishes on the table, she got up and walked to the counter. She put down 10 taels of silver and said with a smile, It's just a small amount of money. It's nothing. The taels of silver can be a congratulatory gift for the opening of your new winery. I wish your winery a prosperous business. In Shuadong quickly got up and thanked her. Thank you for your kind words. I thank you on behalf of my master. The fat lady boss smiled and waved back. Let's go, husband. The shabby scholar hurriedly got up and followed his wife to the door. He didn't forget to turn back and bow with hands folded in front. He behaved like a scholar. Suli watched them leave, and a smile gradually appeared on her face. After eating her dishes, 10 taels of silver couldn't be paid back. In the previous life, when Xian Jingzhou was famous in Yunjing, she was still living a miserable life in the Su family. When she became a member of the martial arts circle, Xian Jingzhou had died. Although she didn't see how Xian Jingzhou showed his great power, she also heard a lot of information about him from her husband. In the battle for the throne in the previous life, all the princes formed cliques. In the end, the third prince was the most powerful one. The third prince was lucky enough to know the news about Xian Jingzhou. Then, he set up a trap to make Xian Jingzhou owe him a favor and work for him. The so-called favor was not a big deal. It was the same as in this life. Xian Jingzhou had to agree to the request of the third prince because of the drawbacks of the secular world. Later, the third prince failed in the battle for the throne, and Xian Jingzhou was also buried in Yunjing. According to her disabled husband, Xian Jingzhou had the intention to die in that battle, so he deliberately stayed behind. Finally, he died without a complete body and reunited with his wife who was already in the underworld. Suli narrowed her eyes slightly. She didn't hear her husband mention how the fat lady boss died in the previous life. Today, she saw her real body and found that the cultivation of the proprietress was even higher than that of Xian Jingzhou. One was in the inborn 8th hurdle, and the other was in the inborn 9th hurdle. The couple was also legendary in the martial arts circle, but they died inexplicably in the previous life. It could be seen how deep and muddy the water was in the battle for the throne. In this life, she had managed to recruit the Xian couple before anyone else, breaking the third prince's wings and strengthening her own strength. However, she also knew that it was far from enough for her to do well in the battle for the throne with just this little bit of foundation she had. Suli sat in the Linli building for a whole afternoon. More than a dozen drinkers were attracted by the fragrance of the wine, but most of them were scared away by the horrible price. Only 2 rich guests ordered a pot of third-class Liehua spirits. After drinking, they ordered a whole jar of second-class Liehua spirits to take away, so that the Linli building would have a profit. Tut-tut, the revenue is only 2 or 3,000 taels a day. It is less than that of the Qinghe province. In the deserted restaurant, Chu Qingning lay beside Yin Xuedong and looked at the account. He couldn't help but sigh. Although he knew that the main purpose of Suli to open the Linli building was not to make money, it was a little uncomfortable to earn so little in a day. In order to build the restaurant before, they spent more than 600,000 taels of silver. How many days would it take to earn back the cost? Yin Xuedong rolled her eyes and said, "You should be content. The road to Yunjing has just been paved. I believe that Suli will definitely do business in the future. You are impetuous. You should learn from Brother Fong and practice hard. He is 1 year older than you, but he has reached the inborn realm. You are only in the acquired 9th hurdle. Don't you feel ashamed?" Chu Qingning scratched his head and said bitterly, "Sister, it is wrong for you to say so. No one can compare with that madman. Fong Yuan is crazier than before. It is shameful for me to reach the acquired 9th hurdle at this age. 90% of the young talents in the world are too ashamed to see others." Yin Xuedong snorted and said in a low voice, "I only know that someone is more and more lazy these days. Be careful that Fong Mu will surpass you one day." Chu Qingning smiled embarrassedly and quickly promised that he would not do it in the future. He said, "Don't tell Suli about it. Otherwise, I don't know how she will punish me." Yin Xuedong said, "Oh," meaningfully and looked back. Chu Qingning was immediately scared and broke into a cold sweat. He suddenly turned back but did not see anyone. He breathed a sigh of relief and said angrily, "Xuedong." Yin Xuedong covered her mouth and snickered. Chu Qingning subconsciously looked up and saw Suli sitting next to the escalator above their head. His anger immediately turned into horror. "Chu Qingning, since you like to sleep, I have recently developed an elixir that can help you practice while sleeping. Why don't you try it?" Suli raised her eyebrows and asked in a low voice. Although she asked for his opinion, her tone was indisputable. Chu Qingning felt bitter. He knew that he had no right to refuse. Suli walked down the stairs slowly. When she came over, She bent over and glanced at today's account. Then she turned around and patted Chu Qingning on the shoulder. She said, Chu Qingning, if you practiced like this in the Chu family 2 years ago, it was really hard and fast. But I can't. Su Li's tone gradually became cold. She said, in the future, there will be few enemies below the inborn realm. If you continue to be so lazy, you can only retire from the main force and manage the accounts in the Linli building. You will never have a chance to fight. If you can live an ignoble life and give your fate to others, you can continue to live like this. In the future, I won't say anything about you. Chu Qingning's expression changed. Finally, he stopped smiling. At this moment, he realized the seriousness of the situation. Su Li's words were not a warning, but a final notice. After he came to Yunjing, he was really lazy. Yin Xuedong stopped keeping accounts and looked back at Chu Qingning firmly. She believed that Chu Qingning could make the right decision. Although Chu Qingning was a little jumpy, if he was serious, he was no worse than anyone else. What he lacked was motivation. Su Li approached Chu Qingning and sneered, think about the hatred of your Chu family. Do you want Fang Yuan and Yin Xuedong to avenge you? Chu Qingning was suddenly shocked and felt ashamed. He said, I was wrong. Su Li stopped lecturing and nodded slightly. Chu Qingning was not like Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan was more persistent. He had been practicing hard all the time. His cultivation progress was no less than hers. Chu Qingning was with a beauty, but revenge was far away. He was not as mature as Yin Xuedong or Fang Yuan. He needed her to remind him from time to time so that his talent would not be wasted. Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival. It is rare to see a lantern show on the East Street. Take Xuedong to have a look. Su Li said slowly. Yin Xuedong's ears turned red and she turned her head away. Tap, 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 Fang Yuan came downstairs. It seemed that he had just finished a period of practice. He fixed his eyes on Su Li, and there was an extremely obscure expectation in his eyes. Feeling the former's gaze, Su Li turned her head and looked at him. She was stunned for a moment and then moved her eyes away without a trace. She said, I will go back to the Su house first. In case of any flaws, then, she left in a hurry before the three people responded. When the beauty went away, Fang Yuan pursed his lips and a deep sense of loss flashed in his eyes. Chu Qingning forced a smile and asked, Fang Yuan, why don't we go to the lantern show? Chapter 174. It was evening when Su Li returned to the Su house. Li Yuelyin and Su Huanli were busy. The Su house finally had a festive atmosphere. However, Su Zipei and Zhu Yin were not there. The old lady was also obsessed with worshipping Buddha and didn't go out. The Su house seemed quite deserted after the servants left. Miss, you are back. Mammy Li quickly handed a towel to Su Li to wipe her face. The servants and maids behind her immediately shouted in unison, Hello? Second miss. Hello, second miss. Su Li had never seen these servants before. She couldn't help but ask, Mammy, Mammy Li understood and quickly pulled Su Li to the door. She said, Miss, the first master came back during the day. These servants were all brought back by him. Su Li's eyes flashed. She didn't ask more, but she was secretly vigilant. The eldest brother clearly said that the Su house didn't need many servants to avoid wasting money. Why did he suddenly change his mind? Where is the eldest brother? I'll go to see him. In the study. It seems that he is discussing with the master about the reopening of the Baiwei building. Su Li handed back the wet towel and turned to Su Qingtan's study. The Su house was not so big. After a while, Su Li appeared outside the study. But she was stopped by Su Qingtan's personal maid, Zhu. She raised her chin and said, The young master said that no one can go in and disturb him except the master. Su Li was stunned. What surprised her was not Su Qingtan's order, but Zhu. It was clear that Zhu had raped her. She could even smell the faint smell of blood. It was what happened today. The first master came back during the day. Thinking of what Mammy Li said before, Su Li frowned. Was it done by the eldest brother? Zhu stayed with the eldest brother for 10 years. She couldn't believe that the eldest brother would be so eager for sex that he couldn't wait for the evening. Suli was not stupid enough to ask Zhuer directly. She retreated to the side of the courtyard door and quietly poured her psychic awareness into the study. Soon, the scene in the study appeared in her psychic awareness. Su Huanli and Su Qingtan sat at the table and talked about the Baiwei building. Su Qingtan seemed to be normal, but Suli felt strange. If the impression that her big brother gave her before was that of a righteous, humble, and courteous gentleman, the impression he gave her now was that of a flamboyant madman. An aura brimming with confidence emanated from within. The sense of inferiority he felt because of his cultivation was gone. Suli looked gloomy. What did Ling Qinglan do to him? In her mind, her psychic awareness condensed into a thread and was about to penetrate into Su Qingtan's body to investigate. But at the moment when she was about to enter, she stopped. She suddenly found that the Naiwan palace between Su Qingtan's eyebrows was set up by someone. If the innate psychic awareness wanted to explore the human body, the most convenient way was through contact. But for Su Li's long-distance exploration, she could only take the risk of entering from the acupuncture point between the eyebrows, the Naiwan palace. As long as the perception of the Naiwan palace was shielded, she could explore the latter's internal situation without being noticed. If the latter's soul force was higher than that of the scout's spiritual sense would be devoured by his Naiwan palace, and he would be heavily injured. Therefore, the inborn seniors would never use this method to explore. There was also a kind of person who was born with a strong soul force, and some of them were even stronger than the warriors of the inborn hurdle. Therefore, it was not without risks for the warriors of the inborn hurdle to explore the Naiwan palace of the warriors of the acquired hurdle or ordinary people. Suli slowly withdrew her psychic awareness. There was hesitation in her eyes. She was calculating the gains and losses. The inhibition in Su Qingtan's Naiwan palace was not harmful, but a warning from the warrior of the inborn hurdle. It proved that the warrior of the inborn hurdle was under his protection. Undoubtedly, the warrior of the inborn hurdle could only be Ling Qinglan. If she rashly touched the inhibition set by Ling Qinglan was likely to find her. She was not sure that she would not leave a trace of pneuma after touching the inhibition. If Su Qingtan noticed it, she would be exposed. More importantly, although Su Qingtan tried his best to restrain the leakage of pneuma, Suli still found that his current cultivation was as high as the acquired 6th hurdle. Moreover, it was growing stronger at an extremely strange speed. She was happy to see that her eldest brother's strength became stronger. She was not sure whether it would affect Su Qingtan's cultivation after touching the inhibition, but she was also worried about whether the secret method of rapid cultivation would cause unpredictable harm to her eldest brother. When Suli was still struggling, the door suddenly opened with a squeak. Suli raised her head and saw her Su Huanli coming out with a relaxed face. Su Qingtan stood at the door to see him off and said with a smile, "I have already told the officer of the Supreme Judiciary. The Baiwei building will be unsealed soon. Dad, you can rest assured." "That's great." Su Huanli laughed. When he looked back and saw Su Li standing at the door of the courtyard, he was stunned and asked, "Li, when did you come back? Why don't you come in?" Su Li moved her lips. Before she said anything, Su Qingtan said with a smile, "Dad, I told you not to let the second sister come in. I will take care of the business of the Su family in the future. Isn't it good for the second sister to enjoy her happiness?" Su Huanli was stunned. He seemed to doubt whether the words came from his eldest son. Su Qingtan had told him more than once that he would give at least half of the income of the Baiwei building to Su Li. Why did he change his temper today? Could it be that he was enlightened? Thinking of this, Su Huanli was happy and quickly agreed. "Yes, yes, yes. Besides, Li, you are old enough to get married. There are many rich and powerful families in Yunjing City." "Dad." Su Qingtan's face changed slightly, and he interrupted his eldest son loudly. Su Huanli was stunned. Just now, his eldest son seemed to be angry. He just told the truth. Why was his son angry? Eldest brother? Su Li said with doubt. The soft tone fell into Su Qingtan's eyes and immediately made his eyes pink. His lower body also had the tendency to swell, but in an instant, his pink turned into ice blue. It seemed that his whole body was poured by ice water, and he had no desire for half a year. Suli frowned subtly. Her eldest brother's situation was very strange. Dad, let's not talk about the second sister for the time being. Let's solve the business of the byway building first. Su Qingtan found a reasonable reason. Su Huanli felt it was reasonable and said, then I will go to work. You haven't slept recently because of your family. Have a good rest. I will ask your mother to call you out for a reunion dinner in the evening. Su Qingtan said, It seemed that he couldn't make a look except indifference. He turned his head and looked at Su Li. There was only coldness in his eyes without any warmth. He said, second sister, you also go to help. I am tired today. Zhu was happy when she heard that. She immediately stood up and pushed Su Li to go out. She whispered in Su Li's ear, Get out of here. Don't you see that the first master doesn't want to see you at all? Su Li bit her lower lip and glanced at Su Qingtan with grievance. Finally, she left silently. Zhu was more complacent when she saw that. It seemed that she had won a big battle. She was already the young master's woman. Even if she was not good enough, she could become a concubine. At that time, she would be Su Li's elder. She was so complacent that she immediately forgot her manners. She thought that her voice was low enough, but Su Qingtan was now a master of the Hotian 6th stage, so he naturally heard every word. Anger flashed in his heart, and his pupils flashed with red light. He said in an unquestionable voice, Zhu come in. Zhu was startled by the sudden angry shout. She looked back and saw Su Qingtan's back entering the room. She was shy, but she still went in obediently. After a repressed gasp, the red light in Su Qingtan's eyes receded. He straightened his clothes and got out of bed. He was in a daze and finally showed regret. Su Qingtan smiled bitterly in his heart. He got up and walked to the window of the study. He didn't regret becoming a member of the Enma cult or practicing such a weird xiangong. The only thing he regretted was that he didn't listen to Ling Qinglan's words. He didn't go out after the lust. He was afraid that Su Li would be worried and forced to go out in advance. He thought that there would be no mistake with the cold air given by Ling Qinglan. But as soon as he came back, he made an irreparable mistake. Just seeing her, I used 3 masses of cold air to barely suppress the lust in my body. The reunion dinner? I can't go. Making up his mind, Su Qingtan took the clothes and the long sword hanging on the wall and left without looking back. He said, Zhu tell my father that there is an urgent matter to deal with in the Supreme Judiciary. I won't go for dinner. Zhu was still secretly happy in the quilt. She suddenly heard Su Qingtan's voice. She immediately popped out her head in surprise and said, Master, you won't even have the reunion dinner? While she was talking, Su Qingtan was gone. In the Supreme Judiciary, Su Qingtan slowly walked to the study. The door of the study suddenly opened silently. Ling Qinglan leaned against the door with a smile and said lightly, You know that you are back? Su Qingtan forced himself to nod. Ling Qinglan sniffed and said, I advised you at that time that it was not the time for you to come out. I didn't even go back to the Ling mansion for you. But you. Fortunately, the Qiyu Xiangong doesn't require a virgin body, otherwise. Su Qingtan's blood froze. He bowed and said in a low voice, I know I was wrong. Hearing Su Qingtan's words, Ling Qinglan finally stopped smiling and said coldly, Remember, since the moment you entered the Enma cult, your life is not yours anymore. No matter what I say in the future, you can't resist at all. I train you as my successor. One day, you will take over my position. Don't let me lose face in front of the hierarch. Su Qingtan nodded in a muffled voice, but he didn't think so in his heart. Ling Qinglan was clearly an inborn senior with a very long life. He didn't even know whether he could break through the inborn realm. Maybe Ling Qinglan was still alive when he died. Take over his position? That was really a fantasy. He never thought about usurping the throne. After all, as long as he passed through the dangerous period of the Qiyu Xiangong, he could become more powerful. At that time, he could control his desire and protect his second sister better. Chapter 175. Following Ling Qinglan into the study, Su Qingtan couldn't help but be stunned. Why did the study return to its original state? Qiyu Xingong was undoubtedly a real evil martial art. Su Qingtan practiced it well, and there were many inner demons. Ling Qinglan used extreme cold to suppress the inner demons in his body. The whole study was like a cold place in the north winter. The surface was covered with a layer of frost. In the past 10 days, Su Qingtan was frozen all over, but he also passed the first stage of Qiyu Xingong safely. He woke up from the muddle-headed state and was no longer completely dominated by the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Even Ling Qinglan was surprised by such a change. He thought that Su Qingtan would wake up at least a month with his willpower. He didn't expect that Su Qingtan only took 1/3 of the time. Now the inner demons in your body are stabilized. I don't have to stay with you all the time. Ling Qinglan walked to the wall and opened the stone door. An amazing cold air came and instantly froze the wall near the stone door. But it stopped at a strange black line and couldn't spread any further. When you go back, I change a place for you. This is the addendum where I usually practice. You will stay here until you completely master Qiyu Xingong. Su Qingtan couldn't help but shiver. When he was muddle-headed, it didn't matter how cold the environment was. But now he was sober. Go ahead. After this stage, you will have the opportunity to master a stronger power. Ling Qinglan's eyes were calm. Whether you are a dragon or a worm depends on your performance. Su Qingtan took a deep breath and stepped into the room. Su Qingtan smiled and pressed the mechanism. The stone door began to close slowly. At the same time, he didn't forget to remind him again, don't stop running Xingong at any time. Otherwise, the cold poison will enter your body. I can't save you. Okay. Boom. The stone door was completely closed, and the addendum fell into darkness. There was only a little light above his head. Su Qingtan sat on the cold stone surface. His eyebrows and hair were covered with a layer of frost at a speed visible to the naked eye. The floating inner demons were also completely suppressed. Su Qingtan's eyes flashed coldly. He slowly closed his eyes and became silent. Once he succeeded, no one would be able to bully Second Sister anymore. After closing the stone door, Ling Qinglan was slightly relieved. He thought highly of Su Qingtan, but he didn't have confidence before he gave him Qiyu Xingong. Fortunately, Su Qingtan had a good temperament. In other words, his obsession was strong enough to let him pass the first test of Qiyu mysterious art. After checking the black lines on the stone door again and confirming that there was no damage, he waved his hand and the bookcase flew over to block the stone door. His heart was filled with sadness. The plan was finally on track. I didn't expect that it would feel good to make arrangements for my funeral. Ling Qinglan muttered to himself and turned around. His pupils shrank instantly. Not far behind him, a green-robed youth holding a folding fan had appeared out of nowhere. The youth was looking at him with a mocking expression. He didn't even notice when this person had arrived. Did he see everything about Su Qingtan? The thought flashed in Ling Qinglan's mind, and there was a slight killing intention in his eyes. The time was not ripe. The thing about Su Qingtan must not be exposed. The young man in cyan didn't seem to notice Ling Qinglan's killing intent. Instead, he walked slowly to the table and sat down as if he was back home. He crossed his legs and said lazily, "Take it easy, Ling Qinglan. I don't want to fight with you. What's more, you are not my opponent. Why do you fight with me?" The voice of the young man was extremely strange. It sounded like a man and a woman. Coupled with the tough face of the young man in cyan, it was extremely incongruous. Ling Qinglan was stunned when he heard the voice. Then he quickly recalled the owner of the voice and blurted out, "Mr. Li?" Su Li chuckled and held out her hands. "Lord Ling, we haven't seen each other for a long time. How are you?" The person was Su Li who followed Su Qingtan. At this moment, she changed her appearance to that of when she met Chu Lu. If she wanted the Linli building to be fully established in Yunjing, the identity of Mr. Li would be exposed sooner or later. In this case, it was better to take the initiative to see him. Ling Qinglan restrained his killing intention and straightened up. He still didn't relax his vigilance and said, "Mr. Li, you come here late at night. Is it a trivial matter?" At the same time, Ling Qinglan was also shocked in his heart. Mr. Li turned out to be a young man? Was he a young master like Ling Li? He remembered that in Qinghe province, Mr. Li, whom he had never met, said little girl, but he was a young man. He couldn't help but have goosebumps. Mr. Li's hobbies were too weird. Su Li waved her hand and chuckled. Lord Ling, you are wrong. Soon after I arrived in Yunjing, I saw an acquaintance sneaking at night. I couldn't help but be curious, so I came to have a look. I didn't expect to see Lord Ling's elegant demeanor. It's really unexpected. Ling Qinglan heard the words, but he didn't relax at all. He said, Mr. Li, don't beat around the bush. If you want something, just say it. Su Li patted the folding fan and made a light sound. She said, Lord Ling, you are really straightforward. I want to ask, what is the Qiyu Xiangong? Can you lend it to me to have a look? He was there from the very beginning. Ling Qinglan's heart sank slightly. He said coldly, Your Excellency, you want to borrow the Xiangong encyclopedia. Isn't it too rude? Su Li said, Oh. She turned her head and suddenly said, Lord Ling, I am really a little abrupt. Then I will put it in another way. You hide the Qiyu Xiangong from the hierarch of the Enma cult and secretly let Su Qingtan practice. Can you let me have a look? In the end, Su Li's tone was cold. It was a naked threat. Ling Qinglan was slightly shocked, and his face gradually became gloomy. If he didn't give it to Su Li, the plan would be ruined if Su Li told Ling Li about it. But the Qiyu Xiangong was the treasure of the Enma cult. How could he show it to outsiders? Mr. Li was still the same as before. He seemed to know everything, mysterious and weird. How about it? Sir Ling, this little brother doesn't have much time. If Sir Ling really feels that it's too difficult, then this little brother can only trouble himself to make another trip to the Ling residence. Hearing the faint voice, Ling Qinglan was helpless. He took out the ancient book from his arms and threw it over. Su Li's eyes were slightly bright. She reached out to catch it, but at the moment when she touched the ancient book, she caught a glimpse of Ling Qinglan's burning eyes. She immediately withdrew her hand like lightning and let the ancient book fall to the ground. She didn't catch it? Ling Qinglan's heart sank. He underestimated Su Li's caution. Mr. Li, you don't even have the courage? Facing Ling Qinglan's sarcasm, Su Li smiled slightly and picked up the ancient book through her sleeves. She said, It is better to be safe than sorry. I haven't reached the point where I can defeat thousands of people. What's more, Lord Ling has been sick for a long time. Maybe you have a good attainment in the poison circle. While talking, Su Li had glanced at the general principle of the ancient book. It was indeed the Qiyu Xiangong. She came suddenly, so Ling Qinglan didn't have a chance to prepare a fake one. Xiangong, high grade. It was an evil martial art. This martial art was guided by the 7 emotions and 6 desires to reach the inborn realm. If the negative effects were ignored, it could indeed be called an extraordinary martial art that could quickly practice to the inborn realm. 7 emotions and 6 desires, 7 emotions and 6 desires. No wonder the eldest brother became like that, Su Li said in her heart. The general principle clearly stated that if one couldn't keep his mind, he would lose his mind and become a madman dominated by desires while practicing this martial art. But the eldest brother had practiced this martial art for several days, and he didn't become like that. In addition, what she saw just now, she instantly guessed that Ling Qinglan used the ice poison to suppress Su Qingtan's inner demons. But the ice poison in Ling Qinglan's body had accumulated for many years, and it was uncontrollable. If he used it rashly, it would inevitably aggravate the ice poison. Thinking of this, Su Li raised her head strangely. His face was ruddy as usual. Did Ling Qinglan find a way to control the ice poison? Ling Qinglan was quite uncomfortable under Su Li's gaze. He was worried in his heart. His medical attainment was widely known in the Qinghe province. If he saw the general principle of Xiangong, he would definitely infer a lot of things. If Mr. Li found that he used external forces to suppress the ice poison, it would be very bad. In fact, he couldn't fight with others at all. Every time he fought, he consumed his vitality. If he fought many times, it was uncertain whether he could help Ling Li get the full moon and heartstrings at the end of the year. Crack. Suli put the ancient book on the table, stood up, and walked to the door. She gave a fist and palm salute and said with a smile, "Lord Ling, thank you for satisfying my curiosity. It's late at night, so I have to leave now. See you later." After that, Suli simply disappeared outside the door before Ling Qinglan responded. She came here because she was worried about the eldest brother. It could be seen that Su Qingtan practiced this martial art voluntarily, and he was not forced by Ling Qinglan. Of course, she couldn't persuade the eldest brother to give up. If Ling Qinglan stayed, the eldest brother would definitely not be in great danger. She was a little relieved and went back to the Su house. Thinking that she came out rashly and didn't make up a suitable reason for Su Huanli, she felt a slight headache. Seeing the figure of the young man in cyan disappear outside the door, Ling Qinglan was stunned. He left after reading the ancient book. Did he really come to satisfy his curiosity? It was dark when Suli returned to the Su house. Mammy Li waited in the yard as usual, like an old mother who was waiting for her daughter to come home. Seeing Suli coming back, Mammy Li was happy and immediately greeted her. "Miss, haven't you eaten? I've prepared a midnight snack for you." Suli said and handed the cyan clothes to Mammy Li. She asked, "Where are father and others?" Mammy Li was a little embarrassed when she heard the words. She hesitated for a moment and then replied, "Master and others didn't send someone to invite you to have a reunion dinner." Suli was slightly stunned and immediately felt relieved. Her original position in the family was no different from that of a maid. This cognition was deeply rooted in the hearts of the Su family. In the past, they were just kind to her because of Su Qingtan. But the attitude of the eldest brother during the day undoubtedly gave a message to Su Huanli. That was, Suli was out of favor. How could a maid who was out of favor be qualified to have a reunion dinner? Suli shook her head and laughed. Suli, did you still have illusions about the Su family? Why didn't you see this clearly? Chapter 176. Time passed day by day. Suli went to the affiliated school of the National Academy to practice as usual. But every day when she came back, she would wait for a while in front of the door to see if the eldest brother would come back at night. After visiting the Supreme Judiciary at night, she understood Su Qingtan's difficulties. As long as she got through the negative phase of Qiyu Xiangong, the familiar eldest brother would come back. However, it didn't mean that the Su family also knew it. At first, with the deterrence of Su Qingtan, peace was maintained in the Su house. But after Zhu Yin recovered, Su Huanli immediately cut off Su Li's allowance. Nobody knew what Zhu Yin said to Su Huanli. "Miss, the third miss has been very close to several rich masters recently." The old master was very happy when he heard that. He doubled the monthly allowance for the third Mississippi. Mammy Li told Su Li what she heard from the maid. In Yunjing City, Mammy Li didn't have the power to ask for the news. Li Yuelian managed the housework in the past few months. Although the servants she hired were not very good, they were not as evil as Mammy Zheng. Mammy Li told Su Li that Mammy Li was a servant of Li Yuelian. Obviously, the Zhu family couldn't extend their influence to Yunjing City. "I see, Mammy Li." Su Li nodded and smiled helplessly. She said, "It doesn't matter. I still have the monthly allowance of the affiliated school. It is enough for living expenses. Mammy Li, you also pack up and live with me in the affiliated school." Zhu Yin had been lying for more than a month. She was very angry. If Mammy Li stayed in the Su house alone, she would be worried. The affiliated school of the National Academy was her territory. No matter how Zhu Yin made trouble, Su Huanli thought that she was not allowed to lose face in the National Academy. Thinking of this, Su Li suddenly froze and then became silent. She was not the person who could give up and betray everything in her previous life. Everything had changed. "Oh, Mississippi," Mammy Li answered and went to pack up. She didn't find Su Li's abnormality. It was not the first time that Mammy Li moved out of the Su house. Mammy Li seemed to be familiar with it. She didn't worry much. The miss was not the weak girl who couldn't protect herself before. Instead, she became mysterious and powerful. As long as she served the miss, she was not afraid of anything. Su Li's luggage was as light as before. There were only 2 boxes, and they were quickly moved to the carriage. Except for a few expensive dresses that Su Qingtan bought for her, the rest were plain clothes, and there were few jewelry, just like before. Mammy Li came to the affiliated school and saw the crooked plaque. Mammy Li carefully carried the box and followed Su Li in. Seeing Su Li's relaxed expression, she couldn't help but sigh secretly. Compared with the Su house, it was more like the home of the Miss. The National Academy was rich and overbearing. Although it was robbed before, and the things in the affiliated school were all moved away, when Su Li reported the situation, they rearranged new furniture for her the next day. They arranged it according to Su Li's own ideas, and it was much more comfortable to live in. Mammy, there is no place to cook in the affiliated school. When it's time to eat, you can take the food box to the canteen of the National Academy. It's just that the National Academy only provides one meal. You have to figure out a way sooner or later. Su Li informed Mammy Li. Mammy Li smiled and said, "Miss, don't worry. It's not a big deal for me to rent a kitchen nearby. It doesn't cost much." Su Li nodded and gave the identity jade token to Mammy Li. She said, "Go to get your monthly salary." Mammy Li took it and went out immediately. It was almost evening. She had to finish the things that the Miss ordered and then prepare the dinner. As a matter of fact, she had been a lecturer of the affiliated school for more than 3 months. She had been practicing in the addendum all the time and never got her salary. According to the consumption level of Yunjing City, Mammy Li should get a few hundred taels of silver. Thinking of this, Su Li shook her head and smiled. It didn't matter if she didn't eat, but her identity was only in the acquired 8th hurdle. She had to pretend to eat. After a while, Mammy Li came back with a gloomy face. She held the jade token tightly in her hand and didn't speak for a long time. Su Li frowned and asked, "What's wrong, Mammy?" Alas, Mammy Li sighed and put the jade token on the table. She said sadly, "Miss, the National Academy said that your salary was taken away 2 days ago." "It seems to be the 3rd Mississippi." Su Li raised her eyebrows and didn't speak. Mammy Li added, "The administrator said that according to the rules of the National Academy, you must see the jade token to get the salary." But the 3rd Miss pestered endlessly. It was really a headache. In addition, the 3rd Miss showed her face in the previous case. Her identity couldn't be fake. The administrator couldn't stand it anymore and gave her the salary. It was 2,000 taels of silver. If it fell into the hands of the first madam, it must be. She couldn't get it back at all. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. Zhu Yin obviously blocked her way of living premeditatedly. The Su house gave the regular salary in the middle of every month. It was just a few days after the middle of the month. If she didn't have other income, she should be short of money now. Su Li smiled slightly and took out a note of 1,000 taels of silver from her arms. She handed it to Mammy Li. When Mammy Li saw the note, her eyes suddenly widened. She stammered and asked, Miss, where did the money come from? Don't be confused." "Of course, the winery earned it," Su Li explained softly, "but the Linli building can't be known by our family. So, please put on a play for the note." When Mammy Li heard the Linli building, it suddenly dawned on her. She almost forgot that the Miss had another property, but now they were far away in Yunjing City. How did the Miss get the money of the winery? Did she hide it with her all the time? Mammy Li felt strange. She washed clothes for the Miss every day, but she didn't see the note. "Miss, how should we put on a play? Even if you let me sell in a brothel, I can't make so much money in one night." Su Li almost spat out the tea. She said, "Just pick it up on the road." Mammy Li blushed and nodded shyly. Later, under the guidance of Su Li, Mammy Li chose a place where there were not many people and pretended to pick up the note. Although her acting was very exaggerated, no one paid attention to her because of the money. The news of picking up something cheap always spread far. What's more, Zhu Yin paid attention to Su Li's situation all the time. When Zhu Yin heard the news, she almost collapsed with anger. "This damn girl, is she really my nemesis?" Zhu Yin gasped and her face was livid. She deliberately planned for many days and came up with a way to cut off the money and food for Su Li when Su Qingtan was away. Although Su Li wouldn't starve to death, she would be so hungry that she would lose her face. In this way, the chance that Su Li's father found her was much smaller and they would be safe. But God let the wicked girl pick up 1,000 taels of silver. It was equivalent to 4 months' money. Su Qingtan should come back after 4 months. Zhu Yin was not as stupid as Su Huanli. Su Qingtan's love for Su Li would not change easily. Although she didn't know why Su Qingtan pretended to be indifferent, she was sure that this attitude would not last for a long time. Zhu Yin was anxious. During the 3 months when she was lying in bed, she didn't stop thinking all the time. However, her little ability couldn't be used in Yunjing. If the mysterious woman didn't appear, Zipei wouldn't be able to hook up with so many rich families to inquire about the news. No, I must let Zipei find the owner of the jade pendant as soon as possible. Otherwise, the longer I delay, the smaller the chance will be. Su Li's social circle was gradually expanding. Zhu Yin was not sure whether Su Li looked like her parents. If she looked like her parents, maybe she would be recognized in the autumn hunting contest tomorrow. She really didn't have much time. Zhu Yin could only pray that Su Li stayed in the affiliated school and played with the medicine pots. She didn't go to the autumn hunting contest. The next morning, Su Li woke up from meditation. Mammy Li carefully took care of her for breakfast. Then she quickly changed into casual clothes and went out. She didn't forget the autumn hunting contest today. A few days ago, Tang Lei specially came to the affiliated school. Although he was a little afraid that Su Li fed him medicine and made him suffer from diarrhea, he was much better than before. Even if he ran across a street, he wouldn't feel breathless. He was grateful. Therefore, he specially came to Su Li and told her about the autumn hunting contest. After the Mid-Autumn Festival every year, the Dahan country would hold a grand autumn hunting contest. It was not only to symbolize the harvest season, but also to test the martial arts ability of the younger generation. The autumn hunting contest was the time when many unknown students of the martial arts school became famous. The talents who gained the most in the autumn hunting contest would receive a lot of rewards from the royal family. They even had the opportunity to enter the imperial palace to meet the emperor. The rewards here were not ordinary ones. They might be magic weapons, Xingong's secret skills that were hard to get, or secret treasures that were hard to see in the martial arts circle. In short, if a poor disciple wanted to make a great leap, today was an excellent opportunity. Su Li walked to the main gate of the National Academy and heard a lot of voices. Su Li saw rows of carriages leaving from the gate of the National Academy. There were also many poor disciples walking there. The age limit of the autumn hunting contest was 22 years old. The young talents whose cultivation was above the acquired 5th hurdle were the most in the National Academy. Speaking of this, Ling Ping is only 21 years old this year. His cultivation is in the inborn 1st hurdle, Su Li murmured. She couldn't help but feel strange. How could these poor people be the opponents of Ling Ping who had experienced hundreds of battles? This year's rewards were almost given to Ling Ping. When Su Li was thinking, she suddenly heard someone calling her name. She turned her head and saw Tang Lei poking his head out of the carriage and waving to her. According to Tang Lei, the autumn hunting contest was not very safe. Even if you just watch from the periphery, you might be accidentally injured. Therefore, it was better not to act alone, especially for a weak woman like Su Li. Therefore, Tang Lei kindly invited her to go with him. Su Li gladly accepted Tang Lei's proposal. She hadn't seen the famous Prime Minister Tang yet. It was a good opportunity to get in touch with him. Chapter 177. The spacious carriage was full at this moment. The one sitting in the middle was not Prime Minister Zhua as Su Li imagined, but a kind old lady with silver hair. Although the old lady's face was full of wrinkles and even senile spots, her face had been painted into portraits and spread in the streets of Dahan country. She was the legend of Dahan country, Gu Yin of the Ling Mansion, Mrs. Gu. Su Li knew that the young lady sitting on the right side of Mrs. Gu was Ling Li's mother, Mrs. Chiu Ming. On the left side was General Ling Ping. Then Ling Li and Ling Qinglan sat on both sides respectively. Then Tang Lei sat next to Ling Qinglan. Su Li didn't know whether it was intentional or unintentional, but the last empty seat was next to Ling Li. This family, which was enough to shock the upper circle of Yunjing City, would specially go to the National Academy to pick her up? It seemed that Tang Lei couldn't make the decision. Even in the face of the emperor, even if the sky fell down, she would never be distracted. But when she saw the people of the Ling mansion, she unconsciously clenched her hands in her sleeves. Only she knew why she was so nervous. Greetings, old lady, Madam Ming, General Ling. Mrs. Gu was also looking at Su Li. Seeing Su Li saluting, she still smiled, but she was not very satisfied. Su Li seemed to be too nervous and a little narrow-minded. But the Su family was a CUNY family after all. It was understandable. Mother, you are the legend of Dahan country. Su Li has never seen you before. She is nervous when we meet for the first time. It's useless to look at her with the eyes of a granddaughter-in-law. Ling Li is a good-for-nothing. Su Li may not be willing to marry him. Qiu Ming covered her mouth and transmitted the sound. Mrs. Gu knew it made sense. But of her two grandsons, one was fighting outside all day and didn't want to get married, and the other wanted to get married but no girl was willing to marry him. She was so anxious that she didn't know when she could have a great-grandson. She saw Su Li today. Su Li was beautiful, clean, gentle, and polite. She was also a lecturer of the affiliated school who was proficient in medical skills. Su Li was a good girl. More importantly, Ling Li liked her. How could she bear it? The communication was only for a moment. Mrs. Gu thought clearly and sighed in her heart. She quickly asked Su Li to sit down and said kindly, "Don't be nervous. I'm not a man-eating tiger. I heard it from the boy of the Tang family. I am curious about the appearance of the talented girl in Yunjing City, so I come to see." Su Li sat next to Ling Li uncomfortably and said modestly, "You flatter me, old lady. I'm still far behind you." Ha ha ha. Ms. Gu laughed heartily. "You little girl, the war is not as tense as before. Ping-er won every battle." Ling Ping Ping, Ping Gu said. Minister Li Li smiled and said, "Gu." I said family, Li said. I Ling said, "Gu minister." Ling Gu, Gu Yu is Ping, and King is Li minister Gu Gu minister Ping minister Yub is Ling. Su Li smiled embarrassedly and said, "You are right. It is a good thing that the country is prosperous and the people are at peace. I'm afraid that you won't accept it. I admire you very much since I was a child, so I take it for granted." Su Li gradually became less nervous after they talked about it. No matter what they talked about, she could quote from other sources freely. Mrs. Gu's turbid old eyes flashed with admiration. The more she looked at Su Li, the more satisfied she was. Even if she didn't want to marry Ling Li, it was also good to marry Ling Ping. Mrs. Gu was reluctant to marry such a good girl. Ling Li bowed his head all the time and didn't dare to look at Su Li. His mother and grandmother were too obvious. Su Li was not a naive girl. Grandma and mother's intention was really shameful. He could even imagine that Su Li would laugh at him in another way when they met again in the future. Childly, the hierarch of the Inma cult and admired by thousands of women in the martial arts circle, should be forced to marry by the elders of his family? It's really an eye-opener for me. Thinking of this, Ling Li's eyebrows twitched for a moment. Finally, he couldn't help but raise his head and interrupt, "Mom, Grandma, have a rest. You are not tired after talking so much, but Miss Su is tired." Mrs. Gu was stunned at first, and then she couldn't stop laughing. She said happily, well, you silly boy. Miss Su hasn't married yet, and you have learned to help outsiders?" Su Li was slightly stunned. What did Mrs. Gu say? The scene was quiet for a moment, and it was extremely embarrassing. Hierarch Ling, who could be calm even in front of a landslide, suddenly heard his grandmother's bold eyes. His tender face instantly turned red like a rolling fruit. Ling Qinglan almost laughed out. He had never seen Ling Li so embarrassed. Cough, cough, cough. Ling Ping suddenly coughed violently, and his loud voice immediately overshadowed Mrs. Gu's words. "Mom, it's too early for you to say that." Qiu Ming covered her face and didn't dare to look at Su Li. She reminded her mother in a low voice. Mrs. Gu found that she made a slip of the tongue, and her face was slightly red. How could she accidentally say what was in her mind? Fortunately, she was old and thick-skinned. Mrs. Gu soon recovered her composure. Qiu Ming directly skipped the previous topic and said, I heard from Ping that your teacher is Qi Xianqing, the miracle-working doctor. Your medical skills must be very good. Can you feel the pulse for me? Suli nodded in a hurry and smiled modestly. Of course, it's my honor to check the body of Mrs. Gu. Mrs. Gu laughed more happily. The older she was, the more she needed to be pampered. Lingli was not sensible, and she was worried about him. Ling Ping was rude. It would be nice if he could be as sweet as Suli. Taking a pillow and putting it on her knees, Suli got up and walked to Mrs. Gu. She squatted down and gently put her white and slender hands on Mrs. Gu's wrist. At the same time, she calmed down and made a diagnosis. Whether it was out of selfishness or public interest, she hoped that Mrs. Gu could be healthy and live to the end of her life. Suli ran the Ghost Valley Xiangong, and the special sense immediately extended along her fingertips. No matter how noisy the outside world was, the whole carriage was quiet, waiting for Suli to give the result. Ling Ping nodded slightly. Once, he was lucky to see Qi Xianqing diagnose in person. His method was the same as Suli's. Suli really learned from Qi Xianqing. After 5 minutes, Suli opened her eyes, and astonishment flashed through her eyes. Mrs. Gu was just at the peak of the acquired realm. She was old, and she had fought many battles when she was young. There should be many sequelae of internal injuries in her body. However, she didn't find many of them. There were only some tricky internal injuries in her body. Thinking of the influence of the Enma cult in the martial arts circle, it was not a problem to get precious elixirs. Suli smiled slightly. Lingli, who was observing on the side, immediately became nervous. He couldn't help but transmit the sound to Suli. Suli, it is not difficult for you to guess the situation of the Ling mansion with your intelligence. My identity must be hidden from my family. As long as you help me, When he transmitted the sound to Suli, Lingli stopped thinking and didn't say anything for a long time. Suli didn't lack money or practice methods. Even the elixirs he made could be better than his. It seemed that he couldn't give Suli any benefits, but Suli was a person who wouldn't do anything until she saw the rabbit. If she didn't promise something, Suli wouldn't admit it. On the basis of not violating the doctrine, you have to do one thing for me unconditionally. Suli's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Ling Li's face darkened. When did he fall to the point of selling favors? Before he had time to refute, Suli had already said to everyone with a smile, Mrs. Gu's body is not serious. She just suffered from hidden injuries in her early years. Although she has been cured by doctors, the degree of cure is not accurate. The root of the disease has not been completely cured. If matriarch trusts this junior will prescribe medicine for matriarch to recuperate. Mrs. Gu couldn't help touching Suli's head and said with a smile, You are very kind. How can I not believe you? Qiumeng gently handed over the paper and pen. Her warm smile was very infectious. Suli was in a trance for a moment. She thought of Lingli in the previous life. No wonder he could show such a gentle smile. It should be a very happy thing to grow up with this woman. After writing the prescription, Qiumeng carefully put it away. Suli suddenly said, Madam, let me feel your pulse. Qiumeng was stunned at first, and then she chuckled. She looked at Suli with her eyes as gentle as water. She reached out her hand and said, Well, thank you. Miss Suli, madam, you are too kind. It doesn't matter. Although Qiumeng agreed to let Suli feel her pulse, she didn't take it seriously. Her cultivation had reached the acquired 8th hurdle, and she was still young. She should be very healthy. When Suli felt her pulse, she frowned slightly, which made Lingli worried. He had also secretly diagnosed his mother's body and secretly integrated it into the tea to consolidate the corporeity and nourish the primordial spirit. But she shouldn't be ill. Suli moved away her fingertips. She hesitated and didn't speak. Ling Ping couldn't hold it anymore. He said, Miss Suli, just say it. What's wrong with my mother? Even Mrs. Gu didn't smile anymore. Qiumeng didn't enjoy any happiness after marrying into the Ling mansion. She worked hard for the livelihood of the Ling mansion all day and never complained of being tired. In her heart, although Qiumeng was not her biological daughter, she was better than her biological daughter. Suli explained cautiously, Madam is not sick, but an old injury. It is not difficult to cure it, but the place where she was stabbed is close to the heart vein. There is a very small and inextinguishable force that has been wearing away her flesh and blood. It seems that it has been worn away for more than 10 years. Even an iron rod can be ground into a needle. There is only a thin film left on the heart vein. If I didn't discover it in advance, Xiaoming couldn't help but grasp the position of the heart vein. She couldn't believe it. Did Su Li mean that she was now wandering in front of the gate of hell? In the carriage, except Tang Lei, who didn't understand, everyone else was shocked. Even Ling Li, who had been pretending to be cynical, was completely cold. If the heart vein was broken, she would definitely die. There was silence in the carriage. Mrs. Gu was really an old woman who had seen great storms and waves. She reacted first and said, "Miss Su, I won't say thank words. Please cure me first, and we can talk about other things later." Of course. Su Li nodded gently. A little green light condensed between her fingers and touched on Xiaoming's neck. The green light immediately flowed into the heart vein along the tendons and veins of the neck. It swallowed the uneliminated force and moistened the thin barrier of the heart vein like spring rain. Xiaoming touched the position of the heart vein. The barrier thickened too fast. She could clearly feel that the place which was slightly uncomfortable became thicker and thicker. She felt at ease. When the green light completely dissipated, the two inborn seniors in the room also saw that the broken position of Xiaoming's heart vein was completely repaired, and she recovered to health. Who? Chapter 178. Mom, I'm fine. Receiving the response of Xiaoming's transmitted sound, old lady was relieved and couldn't help thanking Su Li. She sighed and said, "Speaking of which, Meng was injured more than 10 years ago. In order to be safe, I have to ask Miss Su Li to diagnose my grandson Ling Li. Can you also diagnose my grandson Ling Li?" Su Li was stunned for a moment. She understood Mrs. Gu's concern and had to nod. She had seen through all the problems of Ling Li and made him immune to all kinds of poisons. Now Ling Li couldn't be healthier. She returned to her seat and looked at Ling Li, but Ling Li seemed to be in a trance. It seemed that he didn't hear Mrs. Gu's words at all. Ling Li was really in a trance. His memory went back to the night 12 years ago. At that time, he was 5 years old. He came from his mother's womb. At that time, he already had the strength of the acquired 7th hurdle. That was because he was too young and his body was not fully grown. He didn't dare to practice too fast. Although he had concealed his shocking cultivation at that time, the intelligence he had displayed was quite eye-catching. Moreover, his eldest brother and second brother were all good men. His father, who had already gone to see the heavens, could not help but show off to his colleagues. Perhaps it was the excellence of the third son and the prosperity of the Ling mansion that touched some people's taboos. So, the assassin came. That day was the weakest day since the men of the Ling mansion went to war. The assassin of the inborn realm came quietly. He wanted to kill Ling Li, but Ling Li avoided the vital parts with his own body movement. Only his legs were cut by the assassin. If he was really a child without cultivation, the strength was enough to make his legs disabled. He deliberately screamed to make the assassin fail. Hearing the assassin's voice, his mother rushed over immediately, but she was stabbed in the heart by the assassin. He grabbed the sword in a hurry and used all his strength to offset a trace of strength. So, the sword didn't stab into his mother's heart meridian. Ling Li's eyes were gloomy. He still remembered the surprise and sarcasm in the assassin's eyes. For more than 10 years, he always thought that he saved his mother. Until today, he knew that the assassin left an undetectable trick. If Su Li didn't suddenly want to check Xiaoming's body, he couldn't imagine what would have happened. Li'er. Ms. Gu's voice was like the morning bell and evening drum. It woke up Ling Li, who was full of hostility. He suddenly woke up and realized where he was. But just now, he had unconsciously released the aura of a Xiantian martial artist. "I've already helped you neutralize your aura. You owe me another favor now. Great Hierarch Ling." Su Li's teasing transmitted sound made Ling Li breathe a sigh of relief and smile bitterly at the same time. She owed Su Li more and more things. Without the blessing of the aura, although Ling Li's expression was terrible, it was just like an angry tiger without teeth. It didn't seem to be in line with his identity as a playboy, but there were family ties in it, so it was not strange. But just at this moment, Xiaoming's eyes were wet. Lear was still her good friend. Lear didn't forget what had happened in the past. She had never forgotten that her life had been saved by her third son, who was only the size of a bean sprout. Even though his legs were bleeding all over the ground at that time, even though he knew that it would be very painful to block the sword with his hands, he still roared and stood in front of her. He was only 5 years old, but he knew how to care about his mother and how to protect his important things desperately. How could such a son become a playboy? It was because of these contradictions that she and her mother felt that Li's true nature hadn't disappeared yet. He just abandoned himself because his legs were disabled. That was why the Ling mansion, which had strict family customs, allowed such a weirdo. Otherwise, according to the family rules of the Ling mansion, Ling Li would have been punished to death. "Grandma, what did you say just now?" I was absent-minded and didn't hear it. Looking at Ling Li, who suddenly recovered his laziness, Ms. Gu, who thought that he was going to turn over a new leaf, suddenly got angry. She picked up a pillow and threw it at Ling Li. She couldn't wait to rush over and beat Ling Li. "Silly boy. You are 17 years old. When will you change your playboy appearance? Do you still want to marry a good girl?" Ling Li grasped the pillow firmly with one hand, but he pretended to be smashed and screamed. Xiaoming burst into laughter, and Ling Qinglan was even harder to hold back his laughter. After a while, Ms. Gu took a breath and said, "Well, if I really care about you, I would have gone to see your grandfather. Young Lady Su, I've let you see a joke. Please treat him." The old lady was still worried. After all, it was Xiaoming and Ling Li who were injured at that time. Ling Li's injury was much more serious than Xiaoming's. She was afraid that Ling Li was also injured. She had been in the army all her life. Her husband's son and even her grandson died on the battlefield. She was loyal to the country and had no regrets. But if the second son of the Ling family died because of the plot of a villain, she couldn't bear it. Su Li answered softly and put one hand on the pulse of Ling Li, who had calmed down. Plop, plop. The pulse seemed to be weak, but it was the disability of the blocked meridians. But if you saw the essence through the surface, you would find that the pulse was not weak, but steady and powerful. It was like the sun burning in the sky, full of heat and vitality. Su Li slightly pursed her lips and looked a little annoyed. She looked at Ling Li's evil smile. This guy didn't guard against her. There was no genuine energy to protect his heart meridians and the brain palace. Where did he get the courage? If she wanted to kill him, she could do it now. Great Sect Master Ling is really ambitious. Su Li transmitted the sound in silence with a little annoyance. Ling Li smiled more strangely and said, "There is a voice in my heart telling me that even if all the people in the world betray me, you will not. I seem to be familiar with you. Su Li, do you know the reason?" Su Li slowly withdrew her hand and snorted into Ling Li's awareness sea. She said, "Child Ling is really the first playboy in Yunjing City. You can say these beautiful words to those little girls. Forget about me." "You." Ling Li was speechless. Before he refuted, he saw Su Li suddenly smiled and said to Mrs. Gu, "Mrs. Gu, third child Ling is fine. Except for his legs, he is very healthy." "Haha, that's good. Miss Su, you really worked hard." After curing Xiaoming's hidden danger on the spot, Mrs. Gu was convinced of Su Li's medical skills. She immediately calmed down and didn't ask Su Li whether Ling Li's legs could be saved. At that time, even Qi Xianqing said that Ling Li's legs were incurable. She had already given up. But Su Li knew that even if Ling Li's legs were really disabled, although there was no way to save him in the martial arts circle, there were many elixirs in the spiritual circle that could make ordinary people reborn and regenerate broken limbs. It was not a big deal to have legs disabled. However, that kind of elixir was also precious in the spiritual circle. It was too difficult for people in the secular circle to get it. Later, Mrs. Gu wanted Su Li to help Ling Qinglan's parents, but Ling Qinglan said that he was very healthy and refused Su Li. Mrs. Gu and Xiaoming didn't doubt him, so they let him be. Ling Li felt strange. What the hell was this guy doing recently? He was so mysterious. It would be good if Suli could feel his pulse in advance. But this guy just refused. Suli sat back and calmed down. She had a guess about Ling Qinglan's poison in her heart. Obviously, he used a lot of cold poison, but he could still be like a normal person. Did he take that kind of elixir? Suli glanced at Lingli, who was sleeping beside her. The people around this guy were really not afraid of death. Ling Imo and Ling Qinglan were the same. She was about to tell Ling Qinglan the current situation to Lingli, but the carriage suddenly stopped. Creak. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, and a servant of the Ling mansion greeted her warmly and respectfully. "Old madam, we have arrived at the hunting ground." Swoosh, a gust of wind came. Suli looked around and saw the vast grass forest. With her eyesight, she could see the shadows of beasts flashing in the dense forest from time to time. For the autumn hunting contest, hunting in the hunting ground had been banned for a whole year. Suli sat with Fatty Tang on the side because of her seniority. Fatty Tang chose a seat on the extreme left to avoid the spies of the Tang family. At the same time, he introduced the seats to Suli. It was not easy for Tang Lei to be familiar with these small families. Suli didn't know whether it was a coincidence or not. The seat opposite the Ling family was also the general's mansion, the Wu family. Wu Xiuxiu was the apple of the Ling family. She sat in the middle with Wu Jin. She was young and had an exquisite figure. Her face was delicate and picturesque, but her rather ferocious expression destroyed the beauty, because she saw Suli sitting in the seat of the Ling family at a glance. Chapter 179. Feeling the naked and undisguised gaze, Suli followed the line of sight and saw Wu Xiuxiu. She pretended to be stunned and then nodded with a smile. Her heart was cold. She didn't have time to deal with the Wu family, but the brother and sister hurried to make trouble for her. Did they really think that they didn't have a long life? Seeing the kind smile on Suli's face, Wu Xiuxiu was stunned. Xiahorror immediately came out. A sense of humiliation came to her heart. This bitch. Did she think that she could be on an equal footing with Suli because she had a relationship with the Ling family? How dare she greet her in such a humble manner? If it weren't for the wrong occasion, she would rush over and slap the bitch who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Wu Xiuxiu's chest rose and fell violently. She suppressed her anger. Wu Jin soon found that. He followed Wu Xiuxiu's eyes and saw Suli. His eyes were a little deeper, but he smiled lightly and said a few words in Wu Xiuxiu's ear. Wu Xiuxiu immediately turned from anger to joy. She held Wu Jin's arm and acted like a spoiled child. She also showed off to Suli. Suli raised her eyebrows slightly. It was not suitable to explore with psychic awareness on this occasion. Wu Jin didn't let her see his lips. She didn't know what the brother and sister whispered to each other. However, even if Wu Jin wanted to continue to fight with her, he had to consider the current situation in Yunjing City. What happened in the Su family had attracted the attention of all princes. If Wu Jin dared to fight with her rashly, she didn't need to fight with him personally. The eldest son of the general would be killed. The first prince is here. The sharp voice of the eunuch with cultivation spread through the audience and fell clearly into everyone's ears. Suli looked up and saw that there was one more person on the high platform. It was Dongfang Sheng in a golden robe. He was high-spirited and reckless. He didn't lower his voice when he met Chu Lu at all. The one who shouted was Eunuch Feng, whom she met in the waterside pavilion in the south of the city that day. Suli didn't know whether the emperor came in person today. After Dongfang Sheng sat down, Eunuch Feng shouted again, "The third prince is here." The scene of the royal family couldn't be small. Princes and princesses must learn to be familiar with the high platform from an early age. The third prince, Dongfang Lang, who was also wearing a golden robe with a different pattern, floated over. His footsteps were light and quick, as if there was wind under his feet. His expression was calm, as if he was stepping on the void as he ascended the high platform. He was a refined scholar with high cultivation, causing the young talents below the platform to exclaim in admiration. Dongfang Sheng was gloomy for a moment, and then he became happy in an instant. He got up and smiled. Then, the fifth Prince Dongfang Yang appeared. Compared with Dongfang Lang, he was ordinary, but he was the most handsome among the princes. He was known as the most handsome man in Yunjing City. As soon as Dongfang Yangfang appeared, his clothes fluttered in the wind. His handsome face, which was as gentle as jade, immediately caused many women to scream. The first prince's face was even more unsightly. Even fifth brother's extravagance was inferior to him. If father heard this, how could he take over the Eastern Palace? Suli looked at the princes on the high platform with interest. She sighed in her heart. Sure enough, they were born in the royal family. Their acting skills were not bad. Dongfang Shang and Dongfang Lang fought fiercely in secret. When they appeared in front of outsiders, they immediately became brothers. It was really interesting. At this moment, Eunuch Feng shouted again, "The seventh prince is here." Suli was a little surprised. She looked at the last prince who appeared. She was a little dignified. The seventh prince, Dongfang Wuxue. Dongfang Wuxue was only 12 years old this year. With a thought, a child no taller than 4 feet slowly climbed onto the platform. His appearance could not be said to be cute, nor could it be said to be handsome. It was just a plain, ordinary face. His mother was not favored in the palace and could be said to be the weakest prince in the palace. The seventh brother is here. The high platform is very steep. Don't fall. The three of them smiled and said considerate words, but no one went to help Dongfang Wuxue. Dongfang Wuxue was too young. The emperor was old and was about to abdicate. None of them regarded the seventh brother as a competitor. Only Suli knew that in the previous life, the seventh prince, who looked ordinary, suddenly became the next emperor of the Dahan country. No one knew the specific reason. After all the princes arrived, Eunuch Feng went to the high platform and announced the reward of the autumn hunting for the emperor. It was normal for the emperor to stay in the palace for many years. The families didn't feel strange. They secretly discussed which prince could live in the East Palace. Recently, the emperor was old and weak. He was not as energetic as before. It seemed that he wanted to choose a crown prince. Lingli was half lying in the wheelchair. He was dozing off. His mouth was still drooling. The disciples in the surrounding seats couldn't help but show their disgust and turn their heads. Lingli was really the shame of the young people in Yunjing City. Looking at Lingli's acting, Suli laughed in her heart. Her attention was still on the princes. The princes must come to watch the autumn hunting every year. If they reach the age of 18, they must participate in the autumn hunting experience. They couldn't be lazy. The first prince, the third prince, and the fifth prince were all over 18 years old. After a while, only Dongfang Wuxue was watching the show on the high platform. God feels that it is not easy for people to live in the world. This year, the weather is good, the country is prosperous, and the people are at peace. The autumn hunting contest will be held as scheduled. If a young talent has extraordinary performance and wins the first prize, he can enter the palace to meet the emperor and listen to the god's grace. He will also receive the superior mental cultivation method of Xiangong, the magic weapon Hongyuan sword, and a precious branch. Then, Eunuch Feng took out the book and the sword and put them on the high platform. It immediately attracted a lot of people's attention to the thin book. The secret method of Xiangong. It was the key to the poor disciples. Only by getting the Xiangong could they break through the limit of the common people and become real warriors. If they could reach the inborn realm, they could change their fate and be valued by the imperial court. They could even open up their own families. Which poor disciple would be able to endure such temptation? In the end, Eunuch Feng put the trunk of a withered tree on the table and explained happily, "This thing is offered by a small country. It is not only invulnerable to swords and spears, but also difficult to be melted by real fire. His Majesty specially chose this thing and gave it to the destined person." After he said that, the audience didn't respond. It was difficult to attract attention if they couldn't see the actual benefits. But there were 3 people on the seats of the Ling mansion who fixed their eyes on the branch. The bark was like a feather and the grain was like a bird. It was not an unknown withered tree. It was clearly the branch of the Kurong tree. Since Su Li made an agreement with him, he checked a lot of precious ancient books to get the appearance of the Kurong tree. The Tianya house tried its best to search, but they couldn't get any information about the branch of the Kurong tree. He didn't expect that the Kurong tree suddenly appeared in front of him today. It was really a case of wearing out iron shoes and fruitless searching, but finding it by chance. The second brother's cultivation was the highest among all the people, and his age didn't exceed the limit of the contest. With the help of Ling Qinglan, it was easy to get the branch of the Kurong tree. Qinglan. He transmitted the sound in silence to Ling Qinglan. Ling Qinglan's heart sank slightly. He vaguely grasped his chest, but he still nodded and transmitted the sound in silence. I know. This time, I will try my best to help second brother win the title of the champion. Hearing Ling Qinglan's response, Ling Li grinned and pulled Ling Ping's sleeve. Ling Ping turned his head in confusion. When he saw Ling Li, who didn't look like a playboy but looked serious, he couldn't help but be shocked. He said, "Second brother, I don't ask you for anything, but I must get the branch of the withered tree." Ling Ping, who just wanted to relax, immediately changed his mind. He was full of fighting spirit and solemnly whispered, "Second brother, I will win it for you." Indeed, the third brother never asked him for anything. Even if the third brother didn't know the origin of the withered tree, he must fight for it. What's more, it seemed that the third brother recognized what the withered tree was. Ling Ping glanced at those who didn't take the name of the dried branch seriously. He couldn't help but smile. They all said that the third brother was ignorant and incompetent. But today, none of the so-called talented scholars recognized the dried branch. Only the third brother recognized it. How could they continue to say that the third brother was a waste? He often heard Ling Li's playboy theory. Although he didn't say it, it didn't mean that he was not angry. Today was a good time to vent his anger. "Mother, Qinglan and I will go first," Ling Ping said, and turned to prepare. Since it was the autumn hunting contest, good horses and bows were indispensable. Su Li stood up and smiled. "Thank you for your care all the way. I also want to have a look. If I come to the autumn hunting contest but don't participate, it will be a pity." Su Li's reason couldn't be refuted. Mrs. Gu didn't stop her. Instead, she laughed and said, "Go ahead. Since you regard me as your goal, you should be aware of it." In addition, she saw that Su Li had the cultivation of the acquired 8th hurdle. As long as she didn't encounter dozens of beasts at the same time, she would not be in danger. Under the control of the Northwest Hunting Ground, it was impossible for beasts to gather together. So, there was no danger at all. However, because women were born weak, only a few female warriors dared to participate in the contest. Ling Li stared at Su Li leaving and didn't speak. This girl was proficient in refining the secret medicine. Her cultivation might not be far from his. All the beasts in the hunting ground couldn't be her opponent. What did she want to do? Did she want to get the branch of the Kurong tree in person and then let him increase the bargaining chip? Don't watch her. She has gone far away. If you really like Miss Su, don't fool around all day. Spend more time on her. Xiao Meng patted Ling Li's shoulder gently and scolded him. Ling Li came back to himself and smiled. He couldn't say that he had a close relationship with Su Li and even slept on her bed. When the sundial turned the hour, Eunuch Feng's sharp voice broke through the void. The huge and heavy iron gate of the hunting ground finally opened slowly. The autumn hunting contest starts now. For a time, thousands of horses galloped and the noise shook the sky. Su Li's horse was not good. She fell into the last group of people. Her horse was randomly chosen from the horse farm outside the hunting ground, because she didn't plan to participate in the autumn hunting at the beginning. Just as Ling Li thought, the level of the Northwest hunting ground was too low for her. She was not interested in it at all. However, Wu Jin had a lot of bad ideas. Ling Qinglan might not be able to take action. It was hard to guarantee that Ling Ping wouldn't be secretly set up. Wu Xiuxiu's smile also made her care. If she couldn't get the branch of the korong tree, she would be very troubled. It was easier to take action in the dark. After thinking about it, she thought it was better to take action by herself. As the horses ran, everyone's sight was out of the observation of the people on the high platform. Chapter 180. Roar. The tiger's roar came from all directions, and the horse neighed uneasily. The young man standing in the middle of the open space was pale and sweaty. He pulled the hemp rope and kept observing. He grasped the arrow in his hand tightly, and his pupils shrank in fear. Didn't they say that there were not many beasts in the hunting ground? Why did I meet one as soon as I came up? Roar. Roar. The whistling sound was getting closer and closer, almost reaching his ears. The young man had already lost his composure. He got off the horse and leaned on its back, staring at the other side. However, he did not notice that a majestic tiger was quietly approaching him, its eyes filled with cruelty and fierceness. Nay! The horse had a keen intuition. It was frightened and immediately ran wildly. The moment the young man suddenly turned back, he suddenly saw the tiger rushing at him. The tiger's head was enlarged in his eyes, and even the sun in the sky was completely covered by it. It's over. The young man was so scared that he collapsed on the ground and completely lost the ability to resist. He closed his eyes and waited for death. Suddenly, puff, the sound of the long sword piercing the flesh was heard, and then a plop came into the young man's ears. It seemed that a heavy object fell on the ground. Then he smelled a strong smell of blood. I am not dead. The young man opened his eyes and saw his intact hands. Then he looked up and saw a tiger without a pair of ears. He didn't see anyone selling it from beginning to end. After a while, he finally ran to the high platform crazily. Ghost. Mom, I want to go home. The hunting ground is so terrible. Suli, who was hiding in the forest, shook her head slightly. He dared to come here without hunting experience. No wonder many people died in the autumn hunting every year. Counting this pair of tiger ears, it should be the 37th tiger. Continue. After counting the harvest in the bag, Suli flashed away. She didn't know where the horse was. The speed was not as fast as using the martial arts movement. At this moment, the same scene was happening on the other side of the hunting ground. Qinglan, count how many there are. Ling Ping wiped his sweat and took a breath. For Lingli, he kept looking for beasts to kill. But the hunting ground was too big, and he was only in the inborn first hurdle. He couldn't completely abandon the horse and only rely on the martial arts movement. Besides, even if he couldn't leave Ling Qinglan alone. After all, Ling Qinglan hadn't reached the inborn realm. 25 in total. Hearing Ling Qinglan's words, Ling Ping's eyes brightened. He said, "Good luck, but Wu Jin is out of the game. We can't take it lightly. Let's go deeper." It's not easy to hear Lingli ask for help. I can't let him down. Ling Qinglan smiled bitterly and drove the horse to follow them. The scope of his psychic awareness was much larger than that of Ling Ping. Although he couldn't fight with others now, he could deliberately guide Ling Ping to a certain direction. Therefore, the so-called luck became inevitable. If there was no accident, Ling Ping would win the first place. 3 days were enough for them to hunt nearly half of the beasts in the hunting ground. In the blink of an eye, it was already the 3rd day. Ling Qinglan's eyes were dark. He sat on the horse and looked tired. Ling Ping couldn't help but scold him with a smile. I told you to practice hard and not to get involved in cases. But you didn't listen. Now, you can't even last for 3 days and 3 nights. I'll definitely get your aunt to teach you a lesson later. Ling Qinglan could only bow his head and accept Ling Ping's reprimand. He didn't expect that he could barely maintain the basic life. The speed of the efficacy of the medicine was much faster than he imagined. Is it because of the frequent use of the psychic awareness these days? Ling Qinglan secretly gritted his teeth. This body was really useless. While he was annoyed, Ling Qinglan didn't find that the surrounding illusion was slowly changing. The noises in the surrounding jungle suddenly disappeared, and it became dead silent. Ling Ping noticed it, but it was too late. Well, where is this place? The light in the jungle quickly dimmed. It was dark in the blink of an eye. Ling Ping's expression changed slightly. His muscles tightened, and he immediately protected the heavy prey hanging on the horse. Who is sneaking around? This is the Northwest Hunting Ground, the Royal Land. If you dare to kill me here, you should think about the consequences. The first thought in Ling Ping's mind was that it was his sworn enemy, Wu Jin. But according to Wu Jin's cautious character, he would never kill him on this occasion if he was not absolutely sure. Otherwise, if his grandmother was angry, it would be enough to shake the situation of the Dahan country. Even the death of his father and grandfather would be blamed on the Wu family by his grandmother. At that time, even if the emperor didn't want to kill the Wu family, he had to. Wu Jin wouldn't do the strategy of mutual destruction. Ling Qinglan forced himself to get down from the horse. He staggered and looked even more terrible. His psychic awareness detected that there were as many as 5 seniors of the inborn realm. Even if he could kill them, he was absolutely no match for them. What's more, they trapped them with the tactical matrix in advance. This was a surefire way to kill him. The royal family had been established for hundreds of years and had a profound foundation. The entire Northwest Hunting Ground was protected by a big tactical matrix. Even a senior at the peak of the inborn realm couldn't break in, unless they all sneaked in through formal channels. But the students of the National Academy relied on the Jade Token that was connected with their own bloodline. Other big families also had a quota limit. If a stranger sneaked in, he would be found out at a glance. What kind of person could secretly arrange for someone to sneak into the hunting ground and assassinate them? Ling Qinglan slowly walked to Ling Ping and stood back to back. A fan appeared in his hand. He deduced and looked for the flaws of the tactical matrix. But he soon found that the level of the tactical matrix was too high, far beyond the scope that he could solve. Qinglan, Ling Ping suddenly whispered, I will aim at the northwest and forcibly open a hole. You must escape. The Ling family needs someone to support it. This group of people was likely to come for him. Then, Qinglan would have a chance to escape. If there was no man in the Ling family who was an official in the imperial court, the Ling family would be like a fish on the chopping block. His grandma, mother, and brother would not have a good end. He absolutely could not allow that situation to happen. Ling Qinglan smiled bitterly. Ignorance was fearless. If he knew that he had detected 8 breaths above the inborn 4th hurdle, he would not say such optimistic words. However, even if he had to die today, he would bite off a piece of the enemy's flesh. Ling Qinglan's eyes were fierce, and the breath of the inborn 3rd hurdle began to brew. Swish, 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 swish. 8 black shadows appeared at the same time. They knew that they were walking on the edge of a knife. If they delayed, there would be changes. They didn't say any nonsense and instantly attacked. Every move was aimed at the fatal point. The majestic breath of the inborn realm submerged Ling Ping like a wave. Ling Ping's face instantly became pale. At this moment, he finally understood what was called a desperate situation. Ling Ping held the saber horizontally to block his vital point. He gritted his teeth and wanted to bear the 8 attacks. He knew that he might not be able to bear them, but if he stepped aside, Ling Qinglan behind him would definitely die. Second brother, get out of the way. Ling Ping was shocked for a moment when he heard Ling Qinglan's words, but he still believed in his brother. He rolled on the ground and barely dodged all kinds of weapons. Knives, spears, sticks came to Ling Qinglan's face in the blink of an eye. The next moment, Ling Qinglan would be split into two halves. Qinglan. Ling Ping was furious, but Ling Qinglan's expression was cold. In the face of danger, he didn't hesitate. The folding fan in his hand was broken into half, and countless poisonous needles flew out from it. They covered the 8 people like flying flowers. The poisonous needles were made of 1,000-year-old cold iron. It was easy for them to pierce the inborn shield. Want to kill me? Unless you are willing to die with me. Shockingly, it was a method of mutual destruction. The situation changed suddenly. The faces of the 8 killers in the inborn realm changed slightly. Of course, they didn't want to die with him. What's more, their target was not Ling Qinglan but Ling Ping. Almost in an instant, all the killers chose to defend. For a time, the poisonous needles and weapons collided with each other. Clang sounds were constantly heard. Ling Qinglan was relieved. He flashed to Ling Ping's side. He threw the remaining half of the fan at the feet of the 2 killers and ran the secret method forcefully. His fan was made of materials collected by the Enma cult for 5 years and the famous refining master in the martial arts circle. It could fight with magic weapons at ordinary times. At the critical moment, it could be a peerless treasure for both attack and defense. It was because he carried this fan with him that he had the confidence to reverse the situation when facing the 8 killers in the inborn realm. In Ling Ping's shocked eyes, the remaining half of the fan expanded with the wind. In the blink of an eye, it was big enough for 2 people to stand. The yin and yang fish rotated on it. A transparent barrier extended out and instantly turned into a protective tactical matrix. It was too late for the 8 killers to react. Damn it! How could there be such a change? The leading killer looked ferocious. He looked at the protective tactical matrix with light constantly flowing on the surface. The quality was absolutely not a low-level tactical matrix that could be broken by a senior in the inborn realm. Ling Qinglan had such a treasure. Qinglan, why do you? Ling Ping's eyes were full of doubts. He found that he couldn't see through his cousin. Whether it was the poisonous needles or the tactical matrix, they were far beyond the scope of his understanding. Ling Qinglan heard Ling Ping's words and smiled reluctantly. When he was about to deal with it, he spat out a mouthful of blood and fell down. Ling Ping's expression changed greatly. He quickly grabbed Ling Qinglan and said, Qinglan, Qinglan, how are you? As soon as his hands touched Ling Qinglan's hands, his pupils shrank and he was full of horror. How could Ling Qinglan's body be so cold? He was like a dead person. He looked down at the blood on his chest. There was a layer of frost on it. It took a long time for it to fade away. This was not the injury just now. Even if Ling Ping was stupid, he understood at this moment that Ling Qinglan had a disease in his body. He remembered that a few years ago, his cousin was extremely weak. No matter how many clothes he wore, he always shrank his body. Later, he was inexplicably cured. Ling Ping thought that he was cured by the doctor, so he didn't care about it. Now thinking of it, Ling Ping knew that the disease had not been cured at all. In the carriage, he refused Su Li's diagnosis. Maybe he already knew this. But in the past 2 days, he took Ling Qinglan to run around and even laughed at him for delaying his practice. He didn't notice the abnormality at all. Damn it, Qinglan, you must hold on. I will ask Su Li to cure you immediately. She is the apprentice of the miracle-working doctor. She must have a way. At this moment, the killers outside the tactical matrix had begun to bombard it. Ling Ping didn't have time to pay attention to them. He called Ling Qinglan again and again. He was afraid that Ling Qinglan would die in his arms like his eldest brother. Ling Ping's words came from the sky. It was far away and inaudible. Ling Qinglan's pupils were dilated and fixed in the void. He seemed to see the happy time in the Yi family many years ago. Dad, Mom, I am too tired. I want to find you, but I haven't avenged you. I'm not reconciled. With a groan, Ling Qinglan began to focus his eyes. He looked up and saw Ling Ping, who was crying. The young general, who had never shed tears, was full of panic and hesitation at this moment. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.